Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is part 1 of our story. If you like this what if story and want to see part 2, let me know in the comments below. Before we start, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends. Also, check the description for more great content and my playlist. This story was posted by xKaguraYatox on Wattpad. Now let's start. Death has a way of catching people off guard when they least expect it. In this case, it happens at the age of 16, while riding the bus home from school. With earbuds firmly in place, the music plays loudly, drowning out the world around. This is preferred. It allows for a deeper focus on personal thoughts. Eyes closed, the mind drifts away, imagining a safe haven within the familiar walls of a room. Solitude feels comfortable, a natural state, and in all those years, there has never been a thought to step beyond that comfort zone. Suddenly, the tranquility shatters as a car careens from the oncoming lane and collides with the bus. The impact jolts the vehicle, and the body feels weightless, as if thrown from the seat. Confusion reigns as everything unfolds too quickly. The bus floor becomes the new resting place, and the earbuds slip away, leaving a disorienting silence. Eyes widen in disbelief, taking in the scene of chaos around. Some passengers appear gravely injured, while others seem fortunate with only minor bruises. As vision blurs, a strange slickness on the side of the head becomes apparent. The realization dawns when an injured peer points and cries out in alarm. A crack in the skull signals an impending fate. Someone rushes over, their wrist possibly sprained, but they appear relatively unharmed. Unable to move or speak, the observer watches as this person applies pressure to the wound with a napkin. The darkness encroaches quickly, revealing the futility of the effort. A sense of fear grips the heart, a universal emotion in the face of death. Yet, alongside fear, a heavier weight settles: regret. Reflecting on the past 16 years, there's a painful acknowledgement of wasted time. Few friends, strained family ties, and no accomplishments to take pride in fill the mind. The person tending to the wound murmurs reassurances, but deep down, the truth is clear. There is no escaping this fate. A longing for another chance at life emerges, a promise to cherish every moment and connect with others, to embrace all emotions without hesitation. As breathing grows shallow, the cries of the civilian fade into the darkness. Fear intensifies, but even in that moment, a belief remains. Nothing is worse than living with regrets. The darkness, once thought to be endless, begins to lift. Sounds return, but they are jarring and overwhelming. A woman expresses her frustration about a baby crying incessantly, while a doctor reassures her of the baby's health. Confusion reigns as the scene unfolds. There's an undeniable discomfort coursing through the body. The doctor's words suggest a decision has been made, and the woman's cold response reveals her intent to leave. As she approaches, reaching out, realization strikes. The woman is the mother, and she is in the process of giving the baby away. The crying ceases as understanding dawns. The observer is the baby, and the wish for rebirth has been granted. The doctor smiles, poking the baby's cheek and commenting on the joy of being touched by the mother. The baby, now silent, gazes up, absorbing the moment, ready to embrace whatever comes next. It is difficult to comprehend that you are alive again. Although the body of an infant restricts your freedom, in the grand scheme of things, it is a minor issue. You simply wish to live. The doctor encourages you to rest, unaware that you understand him. With not much else to do in your current state, you close your eyes and attempt to drift off to sleep. Time passes, and contrary to the doctor's assurances, you have yet to find a loving home. The adoption process proves to be quite complicated, requiring considerable time to identify suitable parental candidates. You appreciate the planning and thoughtfulness involved, as children should not be handed over lightly. They need to be cared for, nurtured, and cherished. This understanding deepens when you finally meet your forever family, as the doctor describes them. He smiles and assures you that they will love you and are excited to have you. For a fleeting moment, you wonder if he genuinely believes that or if he is simply eager to free up a bed for another soon-to-be baby. There is no way to know for certain, and if your infant body allowed it, you would likely shrug to express your indifference. Regardless, you now have a home, and that must count for something. However, it does not take long for you to wish you were back in the hospital. Your adoptive mother complains about your crying, almost as if she is the child. Your adoptive father responds impatiently, pointing out that she often forgets to feed you on time. He reminds her that she expressed a longing for this responsibility, so it is too late for her to back out. She admits to being exhausted and questions her ability to manage this situation. You find yourself frustrated, wondering what a baby must do to receive a bottle of milk. It becomes clear that they are not good parents. You wish they had resolved these issues beforehand, but some people learn the hard way that they are not ready for the responsibilities of parenthood. Nevertheless, they make efforts to improve and rise to the challenge they have taken on. During your time living with them, you encounter a startling realization. It happens so quickly that you initially think you are imagining things. While your adoptive mother is vacuuming, an object falls beneath the couch. She sighs and prepares to crouch down to retrieve it, but instead, her arm stretches as if it were elastic, allowing her to pick up the object effortlessly. Your pacifier falls from your mouth in shock. You wonder if your baby eyes are deceiving you or if this is a side effect of your reincarnation. How else could you explain what you just witnessed? It is utterly absurd. People's arms do not behave that way. Unable to communicate normally, you cry. Your adoptive mother grows increasingly irritable with your prolonged crying, but you cannot help it, especially when confusion overwhelms you. She demands that you quiet down, stretching her arm once more to place the pacifier back in your mouth before returning to her vacuuming as if nothing unusual occurred. Unsurprisingly, you continue to cry, and this pattern persists until you overhear a conversation between your parents during dinner. Your mother expresses frustration about how you seem to judge her whenever she uses her quirk, questioning whether babies can be so discerning. Your father dismisses her concerns, insisting that you are just a baby who does not understand what is happening around you. They repeatedly use the term quirk, causing your chest to tighten as you recall where you have heard it before. But that cannot be. My Hero Academia is a fictional world. Superheroes and quirks are not real. Yet here you are, living and breathing, a testament to the reality of this situation. Even so, it feels too far-fetched. You cannot have been reborn into a world that does not truly exist. No matter how much manga and anime you have consumed, it does not make this any more believable. You need proof, real, concrete proof. Until then, you refuse to draw any conclusions. A week later, you catch your parents watching an interview with All Might on television. Shortly after your second birthday, your parents decide to put you up for adoption again. You begin to wonder if there is something wrong with you, as no one seems to want you as their child. It becomes increasingly difficult not to take it personally. The worst part is that they did not even bother to choose a nice place for your adoption. You suspect they selected the least desirable orphanage as a final act of frustration for the stress you have caused them. At 2 years old, you are likely living in the world of My Hero Academia, and you are an orphan. It is a lot to process. Nevertheless, you manage. For obvious reasons, you are much smarter than you appear. Your physical limitations restrict your actions, so you keep your mind engaged by reading books and solving puzzles. One of the caregivers remarks to a colleague about how you are always going through books, questioning whether you truly understand what is happening. The other dismisses the idea, suggesting you are simply enjoying the pictures. When they realize the book you have does not contain pictures, they shrug it off, concluding that you cannot possibly read at your age. They decide they must be overthinking things while you continue reading your book. Yes, actually reading it. It is just another ordinary day until everything changes. The head caregiver announces that a new child will be staying with you. He gestures to a boy standing at a distance, arms wrapped around himself, seemingly uncomfortable. For some reason he looks familiar. The caregiver encourages him to introduce himself to the others. You hear him mumble something under his breath before sighing and glancing your way. He states his name, 𝗧𝗵𝗃, and in that moment, your heart stops. 𝗧𝗵𝗃 grimaced as he told the caregiver to keep their distance, expressing his discomfort with closeness. You recognized him even as a child, knowing the dark path he would eventually take. Living in the world of My Hero Academia, You understood the gravity of your situation. 𝗧𝗂𝘁𝗵𝗲 moved away, settling in a corner of the room, his golden eyes narrowed in a way that discouraged anyone from approaching him. He appeared to be around 8 or 9 years old, but the specifics were irrelevant. What mattered was that you had encountered a pivotal character in the unfolding story. You recalled your dying wish, a second chance at life to prove your worth and make a meaningful impact. You had resolved to live fully, ensuring your actions left a mark on the world. Now, you realized that your choices held more significance than you had initially believed. 𝗧𝗂𝘁𝗵𝗲's demeanor, distant and resentful, made it hard to view him as a villain. He was just a vulnerable child, an orphan like you, who needed protection. You were determined to live boldly, refusing to waste this opportunity. You wanted to ensure that your life would be remembered and that you could inspire others. With newfound resolve, you stood up, albeit unsteadily, and approached 𝗧𝗂𝘁𝗵𝗲. He glared at you, demanding to know your intentions. You understood your purpose, to leave a lasting impression and become someone who could inspire others. After a moment of contemplation, you decided to express your support. You told him you were there for him, a sentiment that seemed to confuse him. He questioned your words, and you reassured him that everything would be okay because you would be there to help. Your smile, though revealing missing teeth, was genuine. 𝗧𝗂𝘁𝗵𝗲 initially recoiled but did not dismiss you outright. The two of you shared a moment of silence, and though he might have found you odd for a child, you were captivated by his presence. Eventually, his patience waned, and he told you to go away, calling you a dirty little kid. You took no offense, recognizing that building a connection would take time. You were determined to help him avoid the villainous path you knew he would take if left unchecked. With a cheerful response, you turned to leave, mindful of giving him space. However, in your child's body, you stumbled and fell, wincing at the pain. It was a reminder of your fragile new form, and you resolved to be more careful. After a moment, you picked yourself up, proud of your small victory, and returned to your side of the room to continue reading your book. 𝗧𝗂𝘁𝗵𝗲 watched you intently, likely finding you peculiar. It was a clumsy beginning, but it was a start. Later, you approached him again, asking if he wanted to have lunch together. 𝗧𝗂𝘁𝗵𝗲 scrunched his nose in response, dismissing you with a sigh, claiming he had no time for children. He barely acknowledged you before returning to his book. Despite his attempts to push you away, you remained undeterred. You were determined to change his life for the better, believing that even small actions could lead to significant changes. To ensure that he wouldn't become a villain and hurt countless people, including a helpless little girl, you settled down next to him, still smiling brightly, and unwrapped the sandwich one of the caregivers had handed you earlier. Admittedly, it didn't smell great, and it was warm for some reason, but considering the state of this place, you knew it was the best you would get. You took a bite of your sandwich and grimaced at the taste. It was a bit off. 𝗧𝗂𝘁𝗵𝗲 muttered under his breath as he shuffled away from you, expressing his disdain for the sandwich. He remarked that the meat was probably spoiled and that you might get sick, which would in turn make him sick. You couldn't do much about your limited dining options and hoped you wouldn't end up with food poisoning. You mumbled the title of the book 𝗧𝗂𝘁𝗵𝗲 had in hand, catching his attention. He stopped reading and looked over at you, surprised that you could read at such a young age. You reminded yourself that you were supposed to be a toddler, but you had nearly given yourself away. You confidently stated that you were smart for your age and asked if the book had nice pictures. 𝗧𝗂𝘁𝗵𝗲 shrugged, dismissing the content as mostly diagrams that a child like you wouldn't understand. His challenge stirred something in you, and despite knowing you shouldn't let his words affect you, you felt compelled to prove him wrong. You insisted that you could understand, snatching the book from his hands. He grimaced and called you annoying, expressing his dislike for kids. It was ironic, considering he was a kid himself, though his pretentious attitude and the complicated books he read made it hard to see. You traced your finger over one of the pages, explaining the function of the aorta and how it carried blood from the heart. By the time you finished, 𝗧𝗂𝘁𝗵𝗲 was visibly shocked, his jaw hanging open. You couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph, reminding him that you were indeed smart for your age. You gently returned the book to him, knowing that while it might surprise him that you could read, what was truly impressive was his ability to tackle such complex material at just 9 years old. 𝗧𝗂𝘁𝗵𝗲 studied you for a moment, his lips pressed into a thin line, clearly unsure of what to make of you. This uncertainty might work in your favor, as it could spark his interest and make him want to keep you close. However, just moments later, he shooed you away, complaining about the smell of your sandwich and demanding you stop lingering near him. You realized you had your work cut out for you. Later that day, you ended up feeling unwell from the sandwich, and Chisaki made no effort to hide his disgust at your predicament. Time passed slowly since you first met Chisaki, and you noted that he was not fond of other people. He often told you to go away, calling you annoying and dirty. Occasionally, he would spend more than a few seconds talking to you, but it was usually to deliver a more elaborate insult. He once threatened to tie you to a tree outside if you didn't leave him alone. Given his age and the presence of others, you weren't too intimidated by his threats. You brushed off his words, confident that he wouldn't actually follow through. Yet, he did tie you to a tree on more than one occasion. You had anticipated that this wouldn't be an easy endeavor, and it was clear that Chisaki hadn't yet realized that you were determined to stay. One day, while recovering from another bout of discomfort, Chisaki unexpectedly decided to leave the orphanage. You knew that sometimes kids played outside, but Chisaki wasn't one for games. Today, he seemed resolute in his decision to leave without looking back. Naturally, you followed him as quickly as your small legs would allow. It would take a while for the caregivers to notice you were both missing, as negligent supervision was common in the orphanage. You wondered how the other kids were still safe. You asked him where he was going, struggling to keep up. Frustration welled within you as you felt limited by your tiny body, used to moving with ease. Chisaki didn't glance back as he muttered about the filth of the place and how he couldn't stand it anymore. He expressed a sense of disappointment in people, suggesting that no matter where he went, he would continue to be let down. You realized you didn't know much about Chisaki's past. You only knew that he had been taken in by a kind-hearted Yakuza man at some point, but the details were vague. You wondered about his parents, how long ago they had abandoned him, and how many years he had spent alone without experiencing love or care. Your heart ached for him, even if he wouldn't share his story. You told him it would be okay, a phrase you had used before, unsure if it offered any comfort. He glanced at you, pressing his lips together, and told you to go back to the orphanage, insisting it was better than sticking with him because he couldn't take care of you. You suggested that you could take care of each other. Chisaki shook his head, but surprisingly he didn't tell you to leave. Encouraged, you smiled and continued to follow him. You have no idea where he's going, but you've made up your mind to stay with him, no matter what happens. For the first time, you find yourself deeply intertwined with the unfolding story. A voice suddenly interrupts your thoughts, catching you off guard. When you turn your head to see who spoke, your eyes widen in recognition. You know him. He is the reason Chisaki ends up committing so many crimes. It's not just his disdain for quirks and rejection of the so-called hero syndrome. He feels a need to repay the man who took him in and restore the Yakuza to its former glory. This man is Chisaki's adoptive father, the boss of the 𝗧𝗵𝗲, affectionately called Pops. Raindrops begin to fall, rolling down your cheeks. The sky has looked gray and murky for a while, so the downpour doesn't surprise you. Pops looks at both of you with concern. He frowns and asks if you are alone and where your parents are. You blurt out that you don't have parents or anyone. Chisaki nods solemnly beside you, his silence revealing the weight of his past. When Pops opens his umbrella to shelter you both from the rain, Chisaki's golden eyes widen slightly in surprise. Pops hums thoughtfully and smiles gently, asking for your names. You respond without hesitation, introducing yourself and your companion. Chisaki, however, interjects that he is not your friend. He sighs wearily but looks up at Pops with a hint of respect. He introduces himself as Chisaki Kai. Amusement flickers in Pop's eyes as he holds the umbrella steady, ensuring you both stay dry. He offers to take you with him since you have nowhere else to go. The moment you've seen in the anime is unfolding right before your eyes. But this time, Chisaki isn't alone. You will be with him every step of the way, guiding him toward a brighter future. Chisaki hesitantly agrees, his voice uncertain, but you can sense that he has decided to give Pops a chance. You know he will be grateful to this man for the rest of his life. In a surprising turn of events, you find yourself taken in by the Yakuza. You recognize that Pops is a good man who upholds certain morals and cares for children, valuing their well-being. You're not entirely sure what kind of business his Yakuza group engages in, but you remember that Pops wasn't involved in anything particularly unsavory. It was Chisaki who started heading down a darker path. You are determined to ensure that doesn't happen this time. Life here is far better than the orphanage you came from, which was likely unregistered and illegal. It's a relief to be away from that place. As a Yakuza, Pops has money. He isn't wealthy, but he has enough to live comfortably, which means you and Chisaki can enjoy a better life too. Excitedly, you twirl in the cute yukata Pops picked out for you, eager for Chisaki to notice. He blinks, asking what he's supposed to be looking at. You beam, feeling like a princess. Chisaki dismisses you, calling you a silly toddler. You insist you're a smart toddler, and even though he scoffs, he knows you're more advanced than most kids your age. Pops smiles and pats your head, telling you that you look lovely. He encourages Chisaki to compliment you as well since you are now family. Chisaki grimaces at the idea, but you can tell he's beginning to soften under Pop's guidance. After a moment, Chisaki comments on your yuka, saying it's all right but would look better on someone else. You gasp and he smirks, clearly enjoying teasing you. Pops frowns at Chisaki, reminding him to be more responsible since he is older. Chisaki reluctantly agrees, but you can see the reluctance in his eyes. Pops reassures you that you look appealing in your yukata, and as he walks away, you can't help but feel grateful. The 𝗧𝗵𝗲 compound has a large courtyard, perfect for a child. You still can't believe you're here, interacting with characters you once thought were fictional. This is a new chance at life, and you're determined to live without regrets. Filled with excitement, you start running around the courtyard, eager to test your speed. You shout out that you're fast, puffing as you run in circles. Chisaki stands by, watching you with a blank expression. As always, he doesn't seem to appreciate your efforts. Having gotten a bit too carried away, you eventually lose control, and by the time you realize what happened, you find yourself lying on the ground, face down in the dirt. Clearly, your speed is a dangerous weapon. With great power comes great responsibility. Chisaki approaches to get a better look at you, shaking his head in disbelief. You spit out the dirt that got into your mouth, and though you try to rise to your feet, it proves to be more difficult than expected. Finally, you understand the issue. Your body is more fragile than you initially thought. All you did was take a little tumble, but now you've scraped your knee and it's bleeding a bit. You also ended up tearing part of the yukata Pops just gave you. You hope he won't be too upset. You frown as you look down at your injury. It's not a big deal, but you're more concerned about disappointing Pops than anything else. Plus, you're strong enough to handle this. Chisaki will probably take this chance to laugh at you, calling you foolish again, or maybe he has a more creative insult in mind this time. Much to your surprise, however, he doesn't ridicule you. Instead, he crouches down next to you and rolls his eyes, commenting on your lack of self-awareness. If you run around like that, of course, you're going to fall. You open your mouth to defend yourself, but before you can, Chisaki reaches toward the gash on your knee. He furrows his brows, clearly uncomfortable with what he sees, but that doesn't stop him. You watch in amazement as he uses his quirk to piece your skin back together. You know he has the ability to disassemble and reassemble virtually anything, whether it's a living being or an object. In the past, he used his powers mainly to harm others, but now he's using them for good. He is healing you, and it makes your heart race. Once he finishes, he shudders and wipes his hand off, even though he didn't get anything on his fingers. You know his squeamishness will only grow over the years, to the point where he'll have to wear gloves and a mask. But that's secondary right now. He just healed you. He just helped you. Overwhelmed with happiness, you jump into his arms before he can protest. You express your gratitude enthusiastically, telling him how amazing he is for fixing you up so quickly. Chisaki pushes you away, snapping that he never gave you permission to hug him. You giggle and jump on him again, clinging to him like a koala. He struggles for a moment but eventually tires and stands there stiffly. He scowls, calling you annoying and commenting on your stubbornness. If you're going to stick to him, he insists on fixing the yukata too, knowing Pops will be upset if he finds out you've already ruined it. You nod happily and let him use his quirk to restore the yukata to its previous state. Chisaki, though only 9 years old, is remarkably skilled with his abilities, which aren't easy to use. He's a prodigy, and that's why he'll become a formidable figure in the future. But if he continues to help people the way he helped you today, he could make the world a much better place. You tell him he's amazing, determined to reinforce that he is capable of good. Chisaki keeps his brows furrowed as he fixes the fabric, and once he's done, he leans back and sighs, weary from using his powers. He admits it's not perfect and that he needs to learn more about textiles. You don't understand what he means. To you, it looks nearly flawless. Pausing to smile again, you finally release your hold on him and stand up. You promise not to run around so much anymore, at least not while wearing the nice clothes Pops picked out for you. Chisaki tells you to do whatever you want, but if you get hurt again, you shouldn't come crying to him, as this was a one-time favor. Despite his words, you doubt it will be the last time he helps you. Today, you've decided to go exploring. Equipped with a stick, you confidently stroll through the neighborhood, ready to take on whatever awaits you. Since you're still very young, you can't undertake these adventures alone. Pops is by your side, occasionally offering his hand to help you maintain your balance. To some, his expression might seem stern at first glance, but he's actually warm and compassionate, doting on you every chance he gets. He remarks on your excitement, noting that you must be eager to see the neighborhood. You grin up at him, expressing your longing to familiarize yourself with the area, especially in case you ever get lost. He praises your maturity, convinced you must be a genius. Even though you shouldn't be too flattered, this is your second life, you can't help but feel proud. Pops shows you around, pointing out different places to use as reference points in case you ever do get lost. He assures you that it's highly unlikely anything like that will happen, as other members of the 𝗧𝗂𝗧𝗂𝗧 are often around, always looking out for your well-being. The weather is sunny and pleasant, and Pops treats you to ice cream along the way. It's a bit frustrating that your small body can't walk very fast, but you know this is temporary, and soon you'll grow into the adolescent frame you're used to. You just passed a convenience store. Further back, there was a small park. You made an effort to remember all these details. Even if it was unlikely that you would ever find yourself completely stranded, it was better to be prepared. Because you were so attentive to your surroundings, you noticed the people passing by. You recognized both of them. How could you not? A mother walked with her child, a young boy, and both had distinct dark green hair and large, innocent-looking green eyes. The boy was around your age, and he squeezed his mother's hand earnestly, occasionally looking up at her and giggling like a typical toddler. In that moment, you stopped moving and Pops came to a halt as well. He frowned and asked if something was wrong, wondering if you were tired or needed him to carry you the rest of the way. You weren't tired, at least not in that moment. You had just spotted two more familiar faces, one of whom was the protagonist himself, Midoriya Izuku. They must have been on an outing, as you were certain Izuku didn't live in this area. If memory served, the 𝗧𝗂𝗧𝗂𝗧 residence was near Sir Nightai's office, and in the anime, Izuku had to take a train to get there. Once again, you felt lucky for this chance encounter. Without thinking twice, you bounded toward Izuku, managing not to trip, and once you closed the distance, you stared at him in breathless awe. His mother, Inko, tilted her head and gave you a curious look. She smiled and, upon realizing your intent, asked if you had come to talk to her son. You nodded eagerly, noticing that Izuku was just as timid as you remembered, blushing and hiding shyly behind his mother's leg. You introduced yourself, smiling and bowing politely, knowing that even if you looked young, you still had good manners. Inko blinked in surprise at your politeness and asked if you were her daughter. Pops chuckled and explained that he had taken you in, so you could say you were like family, though he was too old to be your father. Inko commented on how sweet you seemed, nudging Izuku forward, who let out a flustered squeak. She encouraged him not to hide from the nice girl who had come to introduce herself. Izuku stammered an apology, his cheeks growing redder. He introduced himself, and you felt your heart swell at his cuteness. You were determined to enjoy this moment for as long as possible. Izuku gradually stepped closer, taking a deep breath and carefully choosing his words. He asked if you liked heroes. You should have anticipated that question. Even at a young age, he had found his greatest passion in life. It made you happy for him, yet also filled you with sadness, knowing the hardships he would face. Still, you focused on the positive. Yes, Izuku's journey would be challenging, but you believed he would succeed, and if you had your way, the obstacles he faced might not be as daunting. You nodded and confirmed that you liked heroes, and Izuku's lips broke into a grin for the first time. He excitedly shared that his favorite hero was All Might. You agreed, saying that All Might was super cool and your favorite too. You spoke the truth. Having seen All Might's sacrifices, you could confidently say he was an amazing hero. Both he and Izuku embodied what heroes should be. Izuku exclaimed how amazing All Might was, jumping in place with excitement. Your heart raced at the sight of these characters in real life, understanding their motivations and watching it all unfold before you. In your previous life, you had passed away without achieving anything meaningful, a mere shadow in the world. You had wasted your life instead of forming connections with those around you. This time would be different. Izuku didn't know it yet, but this meeting would remain in your heart forever. You weren't sure when you would see him again, days, weeks, months, or even years, but you were determined to return to him. Just as he had a story, you would create one of your own. Izuku finally said he couldn't wait to get his quirk, his face flushed and breathless from his excitement. Though you smiled, your heart felt heavy. You promised him it would happen, and he nodded enthusiastically, his curly green hair bobbing. He couldn't possibly understand the challenges ahead, but you knew your promise would come true, even if it took time. Inko gently reminded Izuku that it was time to go and encouraged him to say goodbye to his new friend. Izuku's head drooped, disappointment evident as he expressed his longing to talk more about heroes and quirks. Inko suggested they could stay in touch with you, and while she smiled hopefully, Pops took a few steps back, reminding you of his position as the leader of a Yakuza group. Despite being a decent and morally upright person, only a select few are allowed into his social circle. Pops looks down at the protagonist, searching their eyes for forgiveness. He expresses that they are in a hurry and suggests that they might cross paths again. He gently takes their hand and bows his head politely before leading them away. The protagonist realizes there is no way around this situation. The family they have been adopted into is quite unconventional, but they are certain that they and Izuku will meet again. Instead of feeling disheartened, the protagonist bids Izuku farewell with a bright smile, hoping he won't forget about them. However, they understand that memories at his age tend to be fleeting. Yet, Izuku's grin as he waves back makes the protagonist feel like they have already made an impression. The protagonist has been so focused on their urgent goal of preventing Chisaki from becoming a villain that they haven't considered what kind of future awaits them. Being reincarnated into a fictional world has given them a sense of confidence. They feel special, not only because they have a second chance at life but also because they possess a degree of foresight. They know when certain events will occur, how they will unfold, and they understand some people better than they know themselves. However, they have not stopped to think that in this world, they might end up facing significant challenges. After meeting Izuku, the realization hits them. What if they are quirkless? What if, despite their knowledge, they are powerless to act on it? Their situation will not mirror Izuku's. All Might will not choose them as his successor, and no one else in this world, except for the greatest source of evil, All for One, can grant someone a quirk. The protagonist has felt happiness for a while, but once fear takes root, it becomes impossible to ignore. If they are quirkless, they cannot enter you. If they cannot enter you, they cannot make a difference. They feel fortunate to have been reincarnated and to have the opportunity to help prevent tragedies and save countless lives. But if they are quirkless, they might end up with regrets once again. For a time, their anxieties weigh heavily on them. Their once cheerful demeanor fades, and although they try to smile to reassure Pops, fear grips them more than they can articulate. They begin to understand what Izuku must have felt all those years, an overwhelming sense of powerlessness, as if the world is telling them they will never achieve anything. This feeling becomes almost paralyzing, and despite knowing they should be grateful to be alive, they dread what the future holds. However, fate intervenes, and after their third birthday, their quirk manifests. It is an incredible sensation. One moment, everything seems ordinary, and the next, they open their palm to find small, star-like fragments swirling around. An audible gasp escapes their lips. It is difficult to determine exactly what their quirk is, but it feels as though they are holding a piece of the galaxy in their hand. It is something magical, miraculous, just like their existence in this world. They are overjoyed. Even if they do not yet understand how their powers work, they now possess the means to achieve their goals. Not everyone shares in their excitement. When Chisaki witnesses the protagonist use their quirk for the first time, he stares at them with a cold, unreadable expression. He acknowledges that they have obtained their quirk, but his tone reveals a lack of enthusiasm. It is clear from his demeanor that he is not pleased with this development. The protagonist tries to appeal to him, expressing joy over their newfound powers and emphasizing that having a quirk is a good thing. Chisaki, though only 10 years old, shows a seriousness beyond his years. Despite his youthful appearance, the intensity of his gaze unsettles the protagonist. He states that quirks are mutations, recalling that he read about them long ago. He believes that the existence of quirks indicates something has gone wrong, suggesting that those with powers are somehow sick. This marks the beginning of an ideology that will lead him down a destructive path. His longing to restore the Yakuza and cleanse the world of its perceived sickness will drive him to exploit Eri's body for selfish purposes. The protagonist realizes they must change his perspective. They need to help him see the beauty in the diversity of powers and that they should be embraced rather than rejected. They remind Chisaki that he has a quirk too and that he is not sick. They suggest that perhaps there is a reason for these changes, and maybe it was always meant to be this way. Chisaki expresses a wish that he did not have a quirk and that the protagonist did not either, stating that they were better before. He believes they are now sick like everyone else. The protagonist is at a loss for words. Chisaki is intelligent but fixates on the wrong aspects. Even at a young age, he shows signs of obsession, believing the world is broken and that it is his responsibility to fix it. For now, the conversation ends. The protagonist knows they cannot change his mind immediately but resolves to keep trying, no matter how long it takes. Just as they are about to walk away to practice their quirk in private, Chisaki grabs their arm, holding them in place. Something feels off. The look in his eyes sends a shiver down their spine. His grip tightens as he states that Pops has entrusted him with the responsibility of protecting them. He acknowledges that having a quirk is unfortunate but suggests there may be a way to prevent their disease from spreading. Fear clouds the protagonist's gaze as they realize what he means. Despite the unsettling interaction, they strive not to let Chisaki discourage them. They understand that it would be unrealistic for his entire personality to change overnight. You needed more time to help him see reason. After all, he wasn't a villain yet. He just needed a change in perspective. Now that you had officially obtained your quirk, you were doing your best to adapt to it, and so far, things were going well. You could only create star fragments within the palms of your hands, and it was difficult to describe how they felt, almost as if they flowed between your fingers like energy. You had mostly been practicing moving them around and changing their shape, and just yesterday, you accomplished something impressive. By directing the fragments, you could pick up small objects and interact with them, resembling a form of telekinesis, though you were still young and inexperienced. However, you had plenty of time to practice, and with a power like this, you felt confident about taking steps toward becoming a hero. Even if your quirk wasn't exceptionally strong by default, you were determined to make it powerful and use it to protect those you cared about. Plus, the shimmering star fragments were appealing, and you doubted you would ever tire of gazing at them. Testing your quirk consumed a lot of your time, and as a young child, you often depleted your energy in the process. Yet, you felt happy and optimistic about your potential to make a real difference someday. Everything seemed to be going well, perhaps too well. Maybe that was why the world felt compelled to remind you that life wasn't always sunshine and rainbows. It happened while you were playing just outside the 𝗕𝗏 complex. You hadn't strayed far from home, and Pops had tasked Chisaki with looking after you, so you felt no need to be on high alert. Instead, you were happily scribbling on the pavement with the colored chalk Pops had given you. Even as a teenager, you had to admit that it was a fun way to pass the time. Suddenly, someone shoved you to the ground with force. You looked up in disbelief at the young adult man who had pushed you. He wore a crude grin, clearly taking pleasure in bullying children. He sneered, questioning what a snotty-nosed brat was doing there and mocking Pops for looking after you instead of kicking him out of the group. You began to piece things together. It seemed this man had once been a member of the 𝗕𝗁𝗁𝗍𝗂, and Pops must have expelled him. Given his unpleasant demeanor, it didn't surprise you. You weren't a child, so instead of crying, you furrowed your brows in disappointment and remarked on how lame it was to bully a kid. That turned out to be the wrong thing to say. The man grabbed your hair, pulling you closer and threatening you with violence. You winced, feeling the pain. Your mind might have been advanced, but your body was still that of a child, fragile and vulnerable. The man laughed cruelly, raising his hand as if to strike you. But before he could, Chisaki intervened, grabbing the man's arm and pulling him back. Chisaki glared at the man, his eyes cold and devoid of emotion, and demanded he let you go. The man dismissed Chisaki, mocking him for being another kid and implying that the 𝗕𝗁𝗁𝗍𝗂 had fallen apart. Despite Chisaki's warnings, the man refused to release you, his grip painfully tight. He shoved Chisaki back with his elbow, making a grave mistake. Chisaki, unfazed, stated that the man had asked for it. In less than 5 seconds, the man was screaming in pain as Chisaki used his quirk on him, disassembling several of his fingers. You stepped back, horrified by the sight. The man gasped for breath, tears streaming down his cheeks, while Chisaki stood beside him with a passive expression. Despite being barely 10 years old, violence didn't seem to frighten him. Chisaki sighed, warning the man that he had been warned. He approached you, patting your head a few times in a gesture that was far from gentle but was his way of checking if you were all right. He glared at the man, still doubled over in pain, and expressed disgust at his actions toward you. You felt grateful for Chisaki's protection. You had known each other for a while, and even if he didn't openly admit it, he cared for you. The man had been about to hurt you, and you believed he deserved some punishment. Still, you couldn't shake the feeling that this was too extreme and set a troubling precedent for the future. Taking a deep breath, you tugged on Chisaki's shirt and softly thanked him for helping, but expressed concern for the man's injuries. You asked him to fix the man, believing he understood not to act that way again. You didn't want Chisaki to get in trouble, it wasn't right to hurt others. Chisaki blinked in surprise, insisting the man deserved it for hurting you first. You reassured him that you were okay now and pleaded for him to fix the man for your sake. After a moment of hesitation, you glanced at the injured man, who was losing BLD rapidly. You didn't want Chisaki to carry such a heavy burden at his young age or to be led down a dark path. The street was silent except for the man's cries, but eventually, Chisaki sighed in resignation. He agreed to help, though he still believed the man deserved his fate. Chisaki walked over to the man and restored his fingers to their original state. The man's screams ceased, leaving a tense silence in the air. His mouth hung open in disbelief as he stared at his hand, unable to comprehend what had just occurred. Suddenly, he recoiled in fear, exclaiming for distance, calling the other a monster. He dashed away, visibly shaken, with his tail tucked between his legs. Though his fingers were healed, fresh BLD marred the chalk drawings made earlier, a sight that was hard to bear. It had been a narrow escape, but there was pride in seeing Chisaki heed his words. He expressed gratitude once more, embracing Chisaki and resting his small face against his chest, conveying a heartfelt wish for him not to harm anyone again. He asked for a promise that if trouble arose, they would seek help instead of resorting to violence. Chisaki did not resist. Instead, he wrapped his arms around him, affirming that everything would be all right. He had listened, and there was confidence that he would continue to do so, ensuring that no boundaries would be crossed. Months passed since that incident, and Chisaki had grown increasingly protective, insisting on accompanying him everywhere. One day, he inquired about his destination, to which he replied he was heading to the bathroom. Chisaki cautioned him to be careful and waited outside until he finished. It seemed almost humorous, the concern he displayed, but it was comforting to know how much he cared. That moment had evidently left a lasting impression on Chisaki, who, at 11 years old, took his role seriously despite being young for such responsibility. He had always been mature for his age, and Pops trusted him to look after him. Whenever they ventured into the city, Chisaki was by his side. They had just enjoyed a delightful day, sharing pancakes at a family diner, where Chisaki had playfully teased him about being a messy eater. As they walked home, Chisaki held his hand firmly, displaying a surprising comfort with physical contact, likely because he considered both him and Pops special. Although Chisaki had advised him to stay close, his attention was drawn to a familiar figure, prompting him to break free. He called out to the boy with ash blonde hair and striking crimson eyes, who was frustratedly trying to retrieve a toy capsule from a vending machine. The boy muttered to himself about his bad luck, expressing disappointment at not getting the toy he wanted. This boy was Bakugo Katsuki, a well-known rival, and he felt a surge of excitement. Chisaki scolded him for running off and attempted to pull him away, but he stood his ground, determined to help Katsuki. He suggested lending the boy some money for the toy, but Chisaki firmly refused, insisting that the money was meant for their own use. Undeterred, he resorted to his last tactic, pleading and expressing his longing to help. His persistence drew attention, and Chisaki's discomfort grew, while Katsuki watched in astonishment. Eventually, Chisaki relented, handing over some coins, and he gleefully inserted them into the vending machine. To his surprise, luck was on his side, and he won the All Might figurine on his first attempt. Katsuki's eyes widened in envy, but instead of teasing him, he chose to be generous. He offered the figurine to Katsuki, explaining that he could have it since he seemed to want it so much. Katsuki hesitated, his face flushing with embarrassment, insisting he didn't need it and could get it himself. He explained that he would return with more money another day. He continued to smile, encouraging Katsuki to accept the gift, emphasizing that it was not out of pity but the gesture of kindness. Despite his stubborn nature, Katsuki's longing for the figurine was evident. He placed the toy in Katsuki's hand, who blinked in confusion but soon wore a smile, captivated by his new treasure. Katsuki clutched the All Might figurine, his eyes shining with admiration for his hero. He seemed on the verge of expressing gratitude, but true to his nature, he merely huffed that he would have gotten it eventually. He maintained his smile, affirming that this way he could enjoy it sooner, and shared his enthusiasm for All Might, who was truly remarkable. Katsuki responded with unrestrained excitement, declaring his ambition to become just like All Might when he grew up. "No, I'll be even better." A soft, happy giggle escaped as excitement filled the air. However, before anything else could be said, Chisaki tugged on the arm impatiently, urging a sense of urgency. He muttered that they had wasted enough time and needed to hurry up and leave. Understanding his impatience, the response was simply okay. From his viewpoint, waiting around while two 4-year-olds chatted must have been quite dull. A glance back at Katsuki revealed a smile, and a parting thought was shared, wishing him well with his new toy and expressing confidence in his potential to become a hero even cooler than All Might. Katsuki, unsure how to respond, watched as they walked away, holding Chisaki's hand. As he looked down at his All Might figurine, a frown creased his face. He realized he hadn't introduced himself, but he knew her name. Perhaps he would see her again. His face flushed red for the second time that day. Dying had turned out to be a blessing in disguise, as this new life was infinitely better than the last. In the previous existence, there had been little closeness with family, a fact that weighed heavily with regret. Living as a recluse had led to many missed opportunities for connection. If only there were a chance to apologize to parents for past unappreciation, but that was not an option. Instead, the focus was on making the most of this second chance. In this new life, a new family awaited, and the determination to not let them down was strong. One day, Pops approached with his usual gentle smile, expressing pride in the cleverness of his child. He proposed home lessons, offering to arrange for a tutor to teach a variety of subjects. Although there was no need for a tutor, as everything expected at this age was already known, Pops seemed excited about the prospect of learning. It was likely better for others to believe lessons were necessary rather than recognizing the abundance of knowledge possessed at just 4 years old. With a bright smile, the response was enthusiastic, promising to be the best student ever. Pops laughed heartily, a sound that resonated from deep within. He embraced tightly, playfully pinching cheeks, a reminder of his affectionate nature that often overshadowed his role as a Yakuza boss. He expressed happiness at the eagerness for learning, explaining that while other kids attended school, their family was special, allowing for lessons at home. He promised to find the best teacher available. True to his word, soon a kind-looking tutor arrived, complete with thick-rimmed glasses and a patient demeanor. The tutor suggested starting with learning to write a name, which initially sounded fun. However, it quickly became apparent that this lesson might be more tedious than expected. Despite the boredom, a smile was feigned, and the pencil was picked up, pretending to be engaged as the tutor began drawing letters and vocalizing their sounds. Suddenly, a voice interrupted from the doorway. Chisaki stood there, arms crossed, wearing his usual mildly exasperated expression. He claimed that the child already knew all the letters and had read complicated books before, asserting that she could write her name too. The tutor chuckled, acknowledging the prior knowledge but insisted on covering the basics to ensure a strong foundation, especially since young children could make many mistakes. Chisaki rolled his eyes, confident in his assertion. He grabbed a book from the shelf, one clearly above the expected reading level, and crouched next to the child, pointing at a page and giving a look that silently urged her to impress him. The tutor leaned in closer, curious to see what would happen next. The pressure mounted. The child had previously revealed a level of intelligence beyond that of peers, but maintaining the illusion of being a typical 4-year-old was crucial, especially with Pops so excited about the lessons. Acting dumb seemed the safest route, but the reality was that even though trapped in a child's body, the knowledge was vast. In a surprising turn, a full paragraph from an old philosophical text was recited, leaving the tutor speechless. Chisaki looked pleased, ruffling the child's hair in a gesture of approval. The tutor, still in disbelief, marveled at the advanced abilities, declaring her a true prodigy. The experience from a past life made all the difference, transforming perceptions from average student to a child of extraordinary intellect. Chisaki crossed his arms, satisfied with the outcome, reiterating that lessons were unnecessary. She clearly learns much faster than other children her age. Chisaki, not one to shy away from expressing his thoughts, made a comment that left the tutor feeling uneasy. Arguing with Chisaki often proved to be fruitless, so the tutor decided to let him have his say. The tutor insisted that if that were the case, he could introduce more advanced material. He wanted to assess her abilities further to determine the appropriate grade level, which would allow him to create suitable questions for her. Chisaki, however, interjected with a mutter that darkened his expression. He asserted that she would be just fine without the tutor. He claimed to know her better and believed she would feel more at ease learning from him. The tutor appeared troubled, reminding Chisaki that he was hired to provide private lessons and that he answered to Chisaki's father. Chisaki, unfazed, explained that he was merely trying to save his father some money, as he felt the tutor wouldn't be of much help. The insult landed heavily, and Chisaki, with a casual air, turned to you, patted your head, and leaned in close enough for the tutor to hear him clearly. He remarked that he wished you a good lesson, but it was evident that the tutor would not meet your needs. Chisaki left the room, leaving the tutor stunned into silence. Although you had not participated in the exchange, you felt a wave of embarrassment wash over you. The tutor took a moment to regain his composure before attempting to restart the lesson, which turned out to be quite awkward. As it turned out, that was the first and last lesson you had with that tutor. He did not return to the 𝗧𝗵𝗲 residence, not because Chisaki had scared him off, but perhaps due to the discomfort of the situation. Your father expressed amazement at your quick learning, noting how the tutor had mentioned your advanced reading and writing skills. You felt a bit bashful but couldn't help but smile with pride, enjoying the compliments that were new to you in this life. You brushed off the praise, claiming that learning was just fun. Your small stature belied the growing confidence within you, and you wondered if you could rival Katsuki in that regard. Your father chuckled, expressing his belief that you would achieve great things in the future, a sentiment you hoped would come true. Curious about the tutor's return, you asked when you would see him again. While you didn't necessarily need the help, maintaining a sense of normalcy was important. You thought your father would agree, but his response surprised you. He mentioned needing to find someone else, as Chisaki had suggested the tutor was unprepared for the lesson. You frowned at this revelation, unsure if the tutor had truly been that inadequate. He had seemed flustered but had done his best to teach you, even if you hadn't learned anything new. You shrugged and mentioned that you thought the tutor was nice and trying his best. Your father smiled, clearly amused, but he couldn't fully trust the judgment of a 4-year-old when it came to selecting suitable teachers. He assured you that they would find someone better, which you accepted without much thought, as you had no strong attachment to the tutor. However, you soon noticed a pattern. Chisaki disapproved of every tutor your father hired. He either convinced your father that they weren't suitable or pressured them to leave. Remarkably, he managed to deter every tutor who came to the house, despite not yet being 12 years old. One day, you decided to confront him about it. You crossed your arms, trying to appear intimidating, though your cherubic features made it difficult. Chisaki continued with his calligraphy, not bothering to look at you. When you expressed your frustration about the tutors being scared away, he feigned ignorance. After finishing his brush strokes, he turned to you with a serious expression. He stated that none of the tutors were good enough for you, acknowledging your intelligence. He believed your father had come to the same realization and that you would be better off learning from him. Chisaki claimed he had always taught himself everything he needed to know and saw no reason why this situation should be any different. The decision to stop having tutors came a while ago when Pops noticed the improvement in self-study. There was a conversation about why Chisaki was so determined to teach instead of hiring professionals. Despite being younger, Chisaki was exceptionally intelligent, but it was clear that the hired tutors were experienced adults who understood the subject matter better. It seemed almost as if Chisaki was keeping the lessons to himself, which raised some eyebrows. The idea of having lessons with Chisaki was proposed, and it was acknowledged that it could be a fun experience. There was a hint of concern about whether Chisaki would be strict, but the excitement of learning together was enough to outweigh any worries. A promise was made to convince Pops to allow them to study together, with a playful reminder that Chisaki should be nice during their lessons. With a dramatic exit, the moment passed, leaving Chisaki's true feelings unspoken. Fast forward to a joyful celebration. The day of a 5th birthday was in full swing. As the adopted child of a Yakuza boss, the party was extravagant, filled with delicious sushi and an array of gifts waiting to be opened. However, the absence of friends like Izuku and Katsuki was felt deeply, creating a longing for connection. Despite the lack of peers, family was present. With Pops and Chisaki around, loneliness was never a concern. The members of the shy Hasaikai, often seen as intimidating, were surprisingly friendly, joining in the festivities and dancing along to the music. In a moment of excitement, a request was made for Chisaki to join in the dancing. His reluctance was met with playful teasing, but eventually he agreed to a single dance. The joy of the moment was palpable as they danced together, laughter filling the air. Chisaki, despite his initial resistance, found himself smiling as he twirled the younger sibling around. After dancing, the focus shifted to cake, and Pops expressed pride in capturing the moment with photographs. Chisaki's embarrassment was evident, but Pops cherished the family bond. As cake was enjoyed, playful banter ensued, with Chisaki reminding to eat properly. The messiness of the celebration was met with Chisaki's attempts to clean up, showcasing his caring nature. In that moment, amidst laughter and cake, the bond between them felt stronger than ever, highlighting the joy of family and the simple pleasures of life. He used to be nothing more than a fictional character to her. Admittedly, a character she was quite fond of, in all his complexity, but he was still just that, a character. Now he is her older brother. Her family. Someone precious and irreplaceable. Before she even realizes what's happening, the words have already left her lips, expressing her feelings openly. Kai freezes in place. He is no longer wiping her face with the napkin. All he can do is blink repeatedly, and she swears she hears a quiet gasp catching in his throat. He eventually stammers, caught off guard, and his face grows redder by the second. As much as he would like to hide his embarrassment, he is still just a kid. She smiles gently, a smile that reflects a maturity beyond her years. There are moments when he must sense that she is wise beyond her age, and this is probably one of them. She repeats her feelings, emphasizing her love for both him and Pops, expressing gratitude for having such an amazing family. She feels compelled to voice her appreciation. Kai is too stunned to respond, and from across the table, Pops looks awfully teary-eyed. It wasn't her intention to evoke such emotions, but she can't help how she feels. After living with them for several years, it seems right for them to know just how much she appreciates everything they have done for her. Pops reaches across the table to squeeze her hand, affirming that they love her too. He glances at Kai, prompting him to express his feelings as well. The boy grits his teeth, mortified, and it's amusing how red he has become. She giggles and digs into another piece of cake. It's fine if he doesn't say it back. She knows he cares in his own way. He always looks after her and ensures her safety. He is the best big brother she could ask for, and she feels confident about keeping him from straying down a dark path. Kai doesn't say anything else. He sits at the table, watching her enjoy her cake. He secretly wonders if her stomach is a bottomless pit since there's no way a little kid has enough room for all the food she's consuming. He hopes he won't have to witness her getting sick like she used to at the orphanage. Despite his teasing and pointing out her mistakes, he does love her. The words are difficult for him to articulate. He can't vocalize them as easily as she does. Perhaps one day he will, but not now. Still, he knows he loves her, and that is enough. As Pops said, she is his little sister. Even if they aren't related by blood, some bonds are stronger than that. His biological family abandoned him, just as hers did. It doesn't matter that they don't share the same blood. The three of them are a real family, and nothing will ever change that. It is precisely because he loves her so much that he wants what's best for her. He can teach her everything she needs to know. There's no point in relying on outsiders, which is why he got rid of all the tutors. He knows her better than anyone else ever will. They simply aren't needed. The only people she will ever need are him and Pops. Kai doesn't realize it, but the longer he watches her, the harder it is not to smile. She can act a bit silly at times, but it only makes her more endearing. He never could have imagined that the annoying toddler he met at the orphanage would take up so much space in his heart. His beloved little sister. His family. As long as the three of them are together, each day will be brighter than the last. She grits her teeth, mustering all the strength in her body. It's easier said than done, and with the expression she's making, one might mistake her for being uncomfortable. In reality, she is training her quirk, trying to get accustomed to it. There's likely much more to her quirk that she has yet to discover, but for now, she is focused on improving the telekinetic aspect. She needs to concentrate intensely to direct the star fragments where she wants them to go. To actually pick up an object, she has to invest a lot of extra effort. At just 5 years old, she tries not to be too hard on herself for struggling, but seeing how much of a prodigy Kai is with his quirk makes her worry that she might not be as talented. But what's the point in giving up so early? She is still just a kid. It took Izuku an extra decade to master his quirk, and he didn't let that stop him. He may be the protagonist of the story, but she considers him an inspiration. After all, in this world, he is no longer simply a character. He is a real person just like her. If Izuku can become a hero, there's no reason she can't do the same. That's why, even though she can feel a headache coming on, she remains determined, manipulating the star fragments until, slowly but surely, she manages to pull a book toward herself. With a weary gasp, she cancels her quirk, and the book falls into her hands. She mumbles weakly about her accomplishment, acknowledging the difficulty of getting used to her superpower. Perhaps in the grand scheme of things, using her quirk to grab a book isn't all that impressive, but she is proud of herself for persevering, confident that she will grow stronger. All she has to do is not give up. In this new life she has been granted, she refuses to ever give up. While wiping the sweat from her brow and massaging her temples, which have begun to ache, someone steps into the room. It's Kai, and he looks at her with a critical gaze. He questions her determination, wondering why she even bothers when her quirk causes her discomfort. It wasn't as if the power was truly necessary. After all, humans had thrived for countless generations without superhuman abilities. They could manage just fine without such powers. The thought of becoming a hero was something you had kept to yourself, even from Chisaki and Pops. You sensed that sharing your aspirations in a Yakuza household might not be received well. You planned to reveal your intentions eventually, ideally just before the entrance exam, knowing that while they might not react positively, they loved you as family. For now, you opted for partial honesty. You expressed that practicing was enjoyable and made you feel stronger. Challenging yourself was beneficial, as it fostered 𝗕𝗫𝗄𝗏. Chisaki, with his familiar scowl, insisted that you didn't need a quirk and that your efforts were a waste of time. He reassured you that he would always be there to protect you, ensuring nothing would happen to you. While it was comforting to know he cared, your training was not solely for self-defense. It was about being able to protect others. You hoped that one day, you might even be strong enough to protect him in return. You reiterated that your practice was simply fun, emphasizing that you took breaks when needed and felt secure with him around. Chisaki seemed ready to continue arguing, but just then, Pops called for both of you, announcing that there was someone he wanted you to meet. Grateful for the distraction, you hurried out of the room before Chisaki could give you another disapproving look. When you reached Pops, your body froze at the sight of a woman before you. She attempted a smile, but it didn't quite reach her striking ruby-red eyes. You couldn't help but focus on her features, red eyes and wavy silver hair. There was no mistaking it. This woman was Eri's mother. Pops introduced you and Chisaki, mentioning that his daughter had moved out years ago but was finally visiting. You stared up at her in disbelief. You had always anticipated meeting her, but the reality of it was overwhelming. It felt heavy, as if the weight of the world rested on your shoulders. You understood that your actions could significantly impact a little girl's life, either alleviating her suffering or granting her freedom. You greeted her softly, feeling the nerves creep in, even though Eri was still years away from being born. Pops noted your shyness and reassured you that this meeting was long overdue, highlighting that you had an older sister now. Eri's mother scrunched her nose in disapproval, making you feel as if you had two judgmental older siblings. She dismissed the notion of being a sister, stating that she only came by due to Pop's insistence. Pops frowned at her words, defending your longing to connect with family. Eri's mother retorted that she had her own life and had not chosen to be part of this household. She made it clear that she had moved out for a reason. Pops, visibly irritated, asked her to refrain from speaking that way in front of you and Chisaki. It was rare to see him upset, and the sigh from his daughter suggested she was accustomed to his displeasure. She stated she would only stay briefly to appease Pops and mentioned her fiancé waiting at home. The atmosphere was undeniably awkward, but you had a goal. You needed to ensure Eri received the life she deserved, starting with her mother. Building a relationship with Eri's mom was crucial. If she cared for you and trusted you, perhaps she wouldn't abandon Eri as she had in the original timeline. If Eri's mother was present in her life, it could prevent her from falling into Chisaki's grasp. You understood that Chisaki's actions were not limited to experimenting on Eri. Acquiring her quirk had set off a chain of events that led to much worse outcomes. Thus, keeping them apart was essential. You needed Eri's mother to like you. With determination, you decided to use your charm to your advantage. You rushed into the woman's arms, exclaiming your excitement about having a big sister now too. This family just keeps getting better. She stiffens up immediately, not seeming to enjoy the hug much, which suggests she may not be fond of children. After all, this is the same woman who abandoned her daughter. But that's all right. Chisaki was like this at the beginning too. He used to push you away every time you tried to show him affection, but now you can't even remember the last time he resisted. If you could make progress with someone as elusive as Chisaki, then surely Eri's mother would be no different. Pops beams, saying how sweet she is. He understands that she has her own life now and doesn't share his beliefs or traditions, but he hopes she'll at least show her face to the kids occasionally, as it would mean a lot to them. You insist that she is your big sister, laying it on thick and flashing her a big grin for good measure. She seems at a loss for words, and you, being the mischievous little one that you are, have no qualms about guilt-tripping her with your adorable face. Eventually, she gives in, patting your head a few times. She sighs and agrees to stay a bit longer than planned, deciding to text her fiancé about coming home late. You pull away from the hug and do a little victory dance, which earns a few chuckles from her and Pops. Unfortunately, in your excitement, you forget about the other person in the room, a boy with short-cropped hair and golden eyes. Chisaki stares at you, not daring to blink. Later, you explain how the station works, emphasizing the importance of ringing the bell before passing through. Eri's mother, whom you now affectionately call Big Sis, lets out a brief, amused chuckle. She promises to remember to ring the bell. You sternly remind her that if she breaks the rules, she owes you 100 yen. She jokingly expresses concern about going broke if she forgets. You can tell she's trying to humor you, and despite her initial standoffishness, you feel like you're starting to grow on her. As she guides the toy train around the tracks, she mentions how your father says you and Chisaki are very smart for your age and that you've been learning together without tutors. You nod, explaining that Kai tutors you now, and that it's more fun this way, even if Chisaki sometimes gets mad at you for not taking things seriously. She chuckles, saying you are indeed cute. You blink, pretending to be offended that she only called you pretty cute. She quickly corrects herself, saying it's nice that you and Chisaki are such studious children and that she's surprised her father has done such a good job with you. She reflects on her own relationship with her father, admitting that she hasn't always been happy about being born into this family. You listen attentively, and when she suddenly covers her mouth, apologizing for sharing too much with a young child, you reassure her that it's okay to talk. You promise to always be there to listen. Her ruby-red eyes widen, and you can't help but notice how much she resembles Eri. You imagine this is what Eri will look like when she's older, having lived a carefree life. She remarks on your maturity for your age, and you proudly declare that no one is smarter than you. With each passing moment, her expression seems to grow fonder, and you hope this means she will take better care of Eri in this life. Suddenly, your bonding time is interrupted when Chisaki tells you it's late and you need to get ready for bed. You shake your head furiously, insisting that you want to spend as much time with Big Sis as possible. For emphasis, you cling to the silver-haired woman, making a big show of not wanting to let go. Unlike before, she seems more comfortable with your touch and pats your back reassuringly. Chisaki struggles to hide his frustration. He thinks about how this woman has shown up out of the blue. Just because she is Pop's biological daughter doesn't mean he accepts her. In fact, she is proof that BLD ties don't mean much. She should appreciate her father more, but she rarely visits him and treats him with disdain. To Chisaki, she is not his sister. You are his only sister. The two of them had lived together for years, always supporting and looking out for each other. They were a true family. She couldn't just walk into their lives and act like she belonged there all of a sudden. And yet, there was a strange happiness in the air. Why was he embracing her as if he was ready to let her in so easily? It felt unfair. He was the only sibling she would ever need, and he loved her more than this woman could ever pretend to. Not only did she not deserve her father's kindness, but she certainly didn't deserve to be graced by her warm, angelic smile. For a brief moment, Chisaki imagined using his quirk to make her disappear. He repeated that it was time for bed and grabbed her by the arm, pulling her away from the woman. She protested, but he was bigger and stronger, easily holding her in place. Eri's mother blinked in surprise. She acknowledged the time and suggested that Name should listen to her older brother and get ready for bed. She promised to visit again soon, though she couldn't guarantee anything. Name's shoulders slumped, but she recognized it was a start. Besides, there were still several years until Eri was even born. There was plenty of time to accomplish what she had set out to do. She asked her to come visit whenever she could, making her best puppy eyes. She missed her already, calling her Big Sis. Eri's mother promised to do her best, ruffled her hair, and said goodbye as she left the room. Chisaki kept his arms tightly wrapped around her. The woman didn't notice, but as she walked away, he glared at her with intense determination. He was more certain than ever that the only people Name needed were him and Pops. Eri's mother hadn't visited as often as Name had hoped, but it was clear she was making an effort to be involved in their lives, and that was what mattered most. A year had passed since then, and Name was now 6. Although she was still a decade younger than she had been before, She was slowly growing into a body she could be more comfortable with. Being 6 was much better than being stuck in a toddler's body, even if her lack of coordination still frustrated her at times. Everything seemed to be going well. Chisaki hadn't shown any concerning behavior. He still had an aversion to germs and didn't like the idea of quirks, but that alone didn't mean he would resort to villainy. She just needed to keep an eye on him to ensure he stayed on the right path. Yes, everything was just fine. Until suddenly it wasn't. She was minding her own business, flipping through a book, when the sound of someone screaming made her jump. It was Chisaki's voice, and she rushed out of the room toward the source of the commotion. She found him gritting his teeth at one of the 𝗧𝗂𝗧𝗏 members, who was waving his hands in a desperate attempt to explain. The man apologized, claiming it was an accident and that he had barely touched Chisaki. But Chisaki was furious, declaring that only Name and Pops were allowed to touch him. He demanded to know who the man thought he was, his anger palpable. It was clear he was livid, and it was the first time she had seen such an extreme reaction from him, leaving her unsure of how to respond. When her gaze fell on his forearms, her heart sank. All those years, she had never seen him with hives on his body. In the original series, he had gotten them whenever someone touched him or when he was forced to touch someone else. She had hoped that his aversions wouldn't be as serious this time, but what she had just witnessed suggested otherwise. His phobia was worsening. Chisaki hissed for the man to stay away from him. The man nodded weakly and left before the situation escalated further. Alone with Chisaki, his eyes landed on her, and he blinked in surprise. He hadn't realized she was there and asked if she wanted something from him. She didn't know how to respond. She wished she could help him, but she couldn't understand the psychological stressors that had led him to this point. She wanted him to see the beauty in the world and that there was no reason to avoid others to such an extreme. But no matter what she said or did, he held firm to his beliefs. Knowing the kind of miserable fate he had once suffered but feeling powerless to fix his problems was a frustrating experience. She told him that she was there for him, the most she could offer. Perhaps he needed to speak to a therapist, someone with professional experience who could help him address the root of his phobia. It wouldn't be easy to convince him to seek help, but she was willing to do whatever it took. Chisaki frowned and insisted he was fine. The incident was just a mistake made by someone careless, and as long as it didn't happen again, everything would be all right. She expressed her concern that he shouldn't be so afraid of getting close to people. She just wanted him to be happy, and it was disheartening not knowing how to help. Hesitant about getting closer to him, worried he might still be a bit unsettled, she was surprised when Chisaki took the initiative to pull her against his chest. He smiled brightly, a stark contrast to the anger he had just displayed. He reassured her that he was perfectly fine and that the only people he needed to be close to were her and Pops. As long as he had his family, he believed it didn't matter if he avoided everyone else, considering them all filthy. This was more than enough for him. Though he thought it was enough, he was still suffering even if he wouldn't acknowledge it. She wanted him to realize there were plenty of good people in the world he could connect with. She didn't want him to assume the worst of others and treat them as if they were a blight. It all seemed so simple on paper, being reincarnated into a familiar world and changing things as she saw fit. But the truth is that no one can control another's actions, and Chisaki will never overcome his fears unless he confronts them himself. Still, you will be there to support him through everything. You will never give up on him, and you can only hope that one day he will emerge as a changed man. Chisaki holds you close, and it's ironic because, unlike when others have touched him, your presence seems to bring him comfort. Suddenly, he pulls away to look you in the eye, realizing something important. He believes he has an idea that will help him feel more at ease around others. Your eyes widen with hope as you anticipate what he might say. Looking back, you realize how naive you were to feel optimistic. It should have been clear from the beginning that his phobia was intensifying, evident in how he reacted so aggressively. All of it pointed to the natural progression of his character, just like in the original story. You watch, disappointment washing over your features, as Chisaki puts on a mask for the very first time. 3 pillars form the foundation of Chisaki's villainous ideology. First is his longing to repay Pops and restore the Yakuza. Even though Pops never supported Chisaki's radical ambitions and insisted he did not want such a thing, Chisaki was determined to repay him in his own way. He believed he knew better than Pops, and once the 𝗕𝗁𝗂𝗂𝗧𝗂𝗂 emerged from the shadows, he thought they would finally understand each other. Second is 𝗬𝗧, or more specifically, 𝗬𝗧's quirk. Once Chisaki learned what 𝗬𝗧 could do, he devised a plan to manipulate both heroes and villains. With quirk erasing bullets and a serum that restored people's quirks, it was clear that the 𝗕𝗁𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗧 could dominate this superhuman society. His longing to restore the Yakuza grew stronger, and with 𝗬𝗧's arrival, it became something tangible. Lastly, there is his mysophobia, which stems from a deep-seated aversion to quirks. It is one thing to try to remove 𝗬𝗧 from the equation. You are doing your best to ensure that in this timeline, her mother will care for her. Keeping her away from Chisaki seems like the safest option. But even without that, he still harbors a concerning and distorted mindset. Unless the core of the problem is addressed, there is no telling what choices he might make in the future. Approaching him with a frown, you express your concern. It has been a few days since he started wearing that dreaded dust mask. Although he removes it around you and Pops, considering you both clean, it still pains you to see him wear it. Chisaki turns to you and, as expected, pulls down his mask, revealing a smile. He greets you cheerfully, commenting on your messy hair. You feel a mix of frustration and affection as he smiles sweetly while you try to be serious. You admit that your sleep was fine and run a hand through your hair, clearing your throat before bringing up a topic that weighs heavily on your mind. You want to discuss why he despises quirks so much. His reaction is predictable, and over the years, he has likely scrunched his nose at you countless times. You do not fear his judgment but worry about what might happen if this issue remains unresolved. You plead with him to listen, explaining how upsetting it is to see him wear a mask constantly. You express your sadness that he cannot enjoy life like others, free from the worry of illness. He points out that he does not wear the mask all the time, only when around others. He insists that as long as he is with you or Pops, he can take it off. You counter that this means he will always have to avoid the rest of the world, which does not seem like a pleasant way to live. You love him and want him to be happy. Chisaki insists that he is happy as long as he is with those who matter to him. But you worry deeply, especially given his past actions. He has done terrible things, and despite everything he is still your family. You refuse to let such a fate befall him again. If there is even a slight chance to prevent a terrible outcome, you will continue to seek a solution. You move closer and take his hand, noting how he is growing taller and his voice deeper as he matures. He is becoming more like the Chisaki Kai you have always known, and that frightens you. You implore him to help you understand why quirks seem so dreadful to him. You remind him that not all mutations are negative and that evolution is a natural process. He frowns, recalling a theory he had read long ago about quirks being a plague, much like the Black Death. You nod, acknowledging the historical pandemic but questioning how he can compare it to quirks, which do not harm anyone. He explains his theory about quirks being hereditary, suggesting they might have originated from rats, and that it makes more sense than assuming strange abilities appeared out of nowhere. You listen, trying to make sense of his perspective, even as it seems far-fetched. This isn't Spider-Man, for crying out loud. The challenge was made clear when the other person questioned where the proof was. They argued that unless there was a recording of the baby's parents getting sick from a rat bite, the theory seemed like a huge stretch. The response came quickly, pointing out that rats and other animals had been carriers of disease for centuries. Major pandemics had been caused by disease-ridden animals passing their maladies onto humans, and ultimately, quirks were no different. This was just another pandemic, but everyone was too delusional to see it. It was ironic that he, of all people, was calling others delusional. The older brother was clearly struggling with his own thoughts. He reassured the younger one, saying he was fine and could avoid filthy people. He promised that this situation wouldn't be permanent. The younger one felt a flicker of hope when he heard that a cure would be found one day, and the sickness would be eradicated. The older brother put his mask back on and walked away. The younger one felt a wave of dread wash over them. Feeling horrified, the younger one decided to seek help from their father. They walked into his office with a downcast expression, mumbling about their concerns regarding 𝗓𝗁. The father paused his paperwork to listen, acknowledging 𝗓𝗁's moody nature but dismissing it as typical behavior. The younger one insisted that it was more than just personality issues. It was the fact that 𝗓𝗁 had started wearing a mask recently, which seemed odd. The father shrugged it off, saying that if wearing a mask made 𝗓𝗁 comfortable, then it was fine. The younger one pressed on, expressing sadness that 𝗓𝗁 believed everyone around him was sick. They didn't want him to avoid others, especially when they were healthy. After a moment of contemplation, the father acknowledged that 𝗓𝗁 felt strongly about certain things but couldn't be forced to see the world differently. He believed that 𝗓𝗁 would grow out of this paranoia eventually. But the younger one knew better. They wished they could convey their concerns, but being just a 6-year-old, they felt their words would fall on deaf ears. The father didn't seem to worry about 𝗓𝗁's fears, viewing him as a harmless orphan he had taken in and grown to love. The younger one suggested that 𝗓𝗁 should speak to a professional, someone who could help him sort through his feelings. The father seemed surprised by the suggestion, dismissing it as unnecessary. He believed 𝗓𝗁 was simply eccentric but still a healthy, intelligent boy. The younger one felt a sense of disappointment. They understood that the household didn't think highly of therapy, perhaps viewing it as a weakness. Yet they were determined to help 𝗓𝗁 overcome his fears. Despite the lack of support, the younger one resolved to make a change in the world, something impactful that would leave a mark. They still had plenty of time and refused to give up hope. Later, while running errands for their father, the younger one confronted 𝗓𝗁 about drinking coffee. 𝗓𝗁 reacted with annoyance, insisting he was 13 and not a baby. The younger one huffed back, claiming to be 6 and far from being a baby. As they waited in line at a coffee shop, the rich scent of coffee beans filled the air. The younger one took a deep breath, hoping to convince 𝗓𝗁 to buy a scone. But when they turned to speak, they noticed 𝗓𝗁's expression. He was practically shaking, and the words caught in their throat. Just moments ago, he appeared fine, but the longer they stayed there, the more uncomfortable he seemed. Chisaki muttered to himself, expressing doubt about the situation. He was clearly tense behind his mask, concerned about the people preparing the coffee without gloves. He regretted allowing strangers to handle something he was about to consume and decided he would make his own coffee at home instead. His anxiety was escalating, and if he was already this uneasy about buying a cup of coffee, it was hard to imagine what else might trigger him in the future. You reassured him that shops like this had to follow health and safety guidelines, explaining that the workers only handled the equipment and not the coffee itself. You promised him that the place was clean. However, Chisaki was not easily convinced. He grimaced and insisted they leave, grabbing your hand and pulling you out of line so forcefully that you nearly lost your balance. At that moment, another customer entered the coffee shop, and you stumbled right into them. Apologizing quickly, you felt frustrated with Chisaki for being so anxious and moving too fast for you to keep up. The stranger, a man with long black hair and tired eyes, seemed unfazed by the incident. He wore a black jumpsuit adorned with white cloth wrapped around his neck like a scarf. This was 𝗧𝗂𝗧𝗏, who, if everything went according to plan, would be your future homeroom teacher. Though he looked younger than in the original timeline, the resemblance was unmistakable. No one else in the shop seemed to recognize him, likely because he preferred to remain out of the spotlight, engaging in hero activities without seeking recognition. You felt a mix of excitement and awe at meeting someone so important, and Chisaki noticed your starstruck expression. Instead of commenting on it, he turned to 𝗧𝗂, narrowing his eyes and accusing him of bumping into you. You quickly interjected, insisting it was your fault for not paying attention. 𝗧𝗂, with a raised brow, acknowledged his own oversight and offered a sincere apology, even complimenting your shirt adorned with playful cat designs. You beamed at the mention of the kitties, enjoying the brief connection. However, in your excitement, you forgot about Chisaki, who was glaring at 𝗧𝗂 and expressing his disapproval of the interaction. Chisaki's protective nature flared up as he pulled you away, clearly upset. You glanced back at 𝗧𝗂, who watched with concern, his lips pressed together. Once outside the store, Chisaki spun you around, gripping your shoulders tightly and expressing his frustration. He emphasized the need to avoid strangers, insisting that they were dangerous. You understood the importance of safety, but the encounter had felt innocent and friendly. You tried to explain that you were simply being polite and that Aizawa had been nice. Chisaki's anger intensified, and he shouted at you, something he had never done before. His outburst shocked you, and tears began to form in your eyes. Despite your bond as siblings, you felt a wave of fear wash over you. You apologized, pleading with him not to be mad, and the tears spilled down your cheeks. Chisaki, realizing the impact of his words, softened. He wrapped his arms around you, holding you tightly. You could hear the tremor in his voice as he apologized for raising his voice, and he too began to shake, overwhelmed by the moment. The only thing desired is what's best for you. That's understood, right? That's why efforts are made to protect you as much as possible. Trusting others can be difficult. The only individuals you can always rely on are him and Pops. You find yourself at a loss for words, overwhelmed with emotion. Even as Chisaki holds you close, a sense of safety eludes you. After smoothing your hair and attempting to console you for a while, Chisaki suddenly stands and takes your hand. He pulls down his mask briefly, revealing a smile. He promises to make it up to you by buying candy on the way home, hoping that a small treat will earn your forgiveness for his earlier outburst. You nod weakly, aware that candy won't erase the unease settled in your stomach. It will be all right. Everyone loses their temper sometimes. Kai isn't a bad person, he will turn out fine. You keep telling yourself that, but lately, it's becoming increasingly difficult to believe. Years have passed, and to your immense relief, Chisaki hasn't done anything that could be labeled villainous. You are now 10, and he is 17. Unfortunately, his fear of germs seems to be here to stay. You've tried to reason with him countless times, but without professional help or the willingness to change, this stubbornness won't simply vanish. But that's okay. Having a phobia doesn't mean he will inevitably do bad things. Many people live with phobias, and while it's unfortunate that they have to endure such struggles, they still find ways to cope and move forward. There's no reason Chisaki can't do the same. His way of thinking is complex, but he can still be a decent, law-abiding citizen. Nothing else has changed significantly. Chisaki still refuses to remove his mask and gloves, which he began wearing some time ago, unless he's with you or Pops. He remains as moody and condescending as ever, but you've accepted that it's simply part of his personality. You don't hold overly idealistic expectations for him. He doesn't have to be perfect, just not a total menace. Aside from his ongoing phobia, everything has been relatively fine. In the past, he would pick fights with anyone who disrespected the shy Hassaikai, but that hasn't happened recently. Perhaps it's because you advocate for resolving conflicts peacefully. Maybe he's trying to control himself for your sake. Whatever the reason, he hasn't done anything truly troubling, and you can only hope it stays that way. Besides, there are other matters to focus on right now, like the fact that Eri's mother has just arrived, visibly pregnant. Excitedly, you rush toward her, calling out to her as you've developed a good relationship over the years. She giggles as you nuzzle against her round belly, commenting on how cute you are and how you'll likely be a heartbreaker in your teens. You respond with a playful acknowledgement of your beauty, flipping your hair for emphasis. She laughs, noting that your ego seems to be growing, just like your older brother's. You agree, sighing about how no one's ego could compare to Kai's, even mentioning a certain blonde individual who doesn't measure up. When she asks about this blonde person, you brush it off, pressing your palm against her belly, hoping to feel a kick. Nothing happens, but it's incredible to think you've technically met Eri before her 𝗵𝗲𝗍𝗔. You wish for nothing but happiness for the sweet girl who will soon enter the world, vowing to do everything in your power to ensure her happiness. You inquire about the baby's gender, pretending not to know. She shares the news of having a baby girl and mentions wanting to run some name ideas by you. You eagerly agree to help, but when she suggests names, you find them lacking. Finally, she proposes the name Eri, which she has cherished for a long time. Instantly, you smile widely, declaring it perfect and a definite keeper. She expresses her relief at your approval, rubbing her belly and marveling at how quickly everything is happening. You watch her closely, feeling a tightness in your chest, as you solemnly ask her to take good care of Eri. You emphasize the importance of her commitment to her daughter, hoping she understands the weight of your words. She tilts her head, confused, assuring you that she will care for her child. It's clear she doesn't grasp the depth of your concern, thinking you're just being silly. But you know the truth, that she has already abandoned her daughter in a different timeline, and it worries you deeply. You push aside thoughts of what could have been, focusing instead on making sure things turn out better in this reality. You smile, already envisioning Eri growing up to be as appealing as her mother. She playfully poked the tip of your nose and pulled you into a brief embrace. Since they were technically siblings, once Eri was born, you would become an aunt. The thought of being Auntie Name, still a child yourself, was amusing. You proudly declared that you would be the best aunt ever. She expressed her confidence in you but also admitted a worry that Eri might end up liking you more than her. You shrugged, playfully saying it wasn't your fault, you were amazing. Eri's mom laughed and squeezed you close one last time before pulling away, supporting her belly with a hand. She mentioned that it was nice to see you and that she had promised her father she would say hi. Things were getting hectic, so she wasn't sure how often she would be able to visit during her 𝗵𝗃, but she promised to send word as soon as Eri was born. You nodded happily, feeling reassured by her excitement. It was a good sign for the future. If she truly loved her child, nothing would scare her away, even once Eri's quirk manifested. You wondered if there was a way to prevent the death of Eri's father, but given that you had no clue when her powers would appear, it seemed nearly impossible. Regardless, you hoped that at least one of Eri's parents would be there to look after her. Pops announced the arrival of Kurono, who was around Chisaki's age and would be joining the 𝗕𝗁𝗂𝗃. You had been curious about when Chisaki's devoted right-hand man would make his appearance. It was amusing to think about how loyal Kurono was in the canon series, willing to do anything to further Chisaki's ideals. The irony was palpable as Chisaki glared at him as if he had just spotted something unpleasant. You laughed, telling Chisaki to play nice, and turned to Kurono with a smile, apologizing for your socially awkward older brother. Instead of responding, Kurono merely raised an eyebrow, while Chisaki appeared to be grinding his teeth in frustration, even with his mask on. He muttered that he was not socially inept, just that he didn't like people. You shrugged, pointing out that no one ever left a conversation with him smiling. Chisaki balled his gloved hand into a fist and shook it at you dramatically, while Kurono watched with an incredulous expression. Kurono frowned, questioning if this was truly a Yakuza group. Pops laughed heartily, assuring him that their organization was respectable, and while you and Chisaki brightened it up, he admitted it was mostly you. Chisaki gasped in disbelief at Pop's comment. You laughed and jumped into Chisaki's embrace, feeling the warmth of his presence. Now that he was nearly an adult, the height difference between you was striking. He looked just like he did in the anime and manga, and despite the years passing without incident, you found comfort in his arms. You grinned, teasing him that while you liked to joke, you loved him a lot, even the most. To emphasize your affection, you stood on your toes, tugged on his sleeve to pull him closer, and planted an exaggerated kiss on his cheek. He recoiled and you worried you might have upset him. He was comfortable enough around you and Pops for hugs, but you feared that a kiss might have crossed a line. Looking up at him with a guilty expression, you apologized, wondering if you should have thought it through more. You wouldn't blame him if he got mad. His phobia was something he couldn't control, and you might have pushed him too far. To your surprise, instead of looking disgusted or snapping at you, he stood still and blinked. You questioned if you were imagining things, as his face seemed to turn red. Pops chuckled, teasing that Chisaki was blushing. Chisaki dismissed it, but for all his usual composure, he was doing a poor job of convincing anyone. The sight of Chisaki blushing was almost surreal, making you question if you were trapped in a dream. You pinched your cheek to confirm you were awake, feeling the sting. Pops folded his hands in his kimono and smiled warmly, explaining that they were a tight-knit household. By joining the 𝗕𝗁𝗂𝗃, Kurono could consider himself part of the family, as long as he acted in accordance with their values. Kurono glanced over at you, and you continued to tease Chisaki about his blush. Kurono expressed gratitude for being welcomed and mentioned he would enjoy his time there. You thought he would, as he quickly became attached to Chisaki, making it his mission to support him. Kurono made sure to buy the extra soft toilet paper that Chisaki liked, bowing his head as he presented it like an offering. Chisaki gave him a deadpan stare, and you struggled to contain your laughter. Kurono's efforts to win Chisaki over continued, as he made a conscious effort to learn about Chisaki's preferences. Given that your older brother was quite particular, the list of his dislikes was extensive. Chisaki grimaced at an unwashed plate left out by someone who would remain unnamed. Definitely not you. Kurono nodded vigorously, likely making a mental note that Chisaki couldn't stand the sight of dirty dishes. Chisaki pointed out more things he found disgusting, and the banter continued, filled with light-hearted teasing and camaraderie. To be honest, the listener had long since tuned out. They had heard Chisaki rant more times than they could count. After living with him for around 8 years, it felt like they had done their part. Now it was Kurono's turn to endure Chisaki's endless chatter, and he seemed more than willing to do so. Kurono nodded, focusing intently, his concentration so fierce it was a wonder steam didn't start coming out of his ears. He assured Kai that he would keep everything tidy, just as he liked it. The listener thought to themselves that Kurono's admiration for Chisaki was a bit much and that he should tone it down. They jokingly expressed their concern about being exposed to anything inappropriate, noting their young age and longing to avoid trauma. Chisaki and Kurono exchanged confused glances, clearly missing the humor, which only made the moment more amusing. For a while, not much changed. Kurono stuck to Chisaki like glue, even when Chisaki snapped at him to leave. The listener admired Kurono's determination, finding their interactions entertaining. However, Kurono's progress was minimal, and Chisaki was far from accepting him. Then one day, an unexpected opportunity arose for Kurono. The listener was enjoying their time, feeling free to slack off on studying due to their advanced mind for their age. They dedicated their free time to honing their quirk, pleased to find they had improved. Telekinesis was still challenging, but they had made significant strides since a few years prior. The only downside was having to keep their training a secret from Chisaki, who would fuss about it endlessly. Training in secret allowed for better focus and reflection on mistakes. Everything was going exceptionally well, perhaps too well, which made the listener's excitement bubble over. Living in this world, meeting fascinating characters, and dreaming of the future was exhilarating. They couldn't help but shout in joy after a particularly good training session, declaring their potential to become a hero. However, their joy was short-lived. A voice interrupted their thoughts, asking what they meant by becoming a hero. The listener's heart sank as they turned to see a young man in the doorway, clearly having overheard everything. It wasn't Chisaki, which was a relief, but Kurono's glare indicated he was not pleased with what he had just learned. The listener tried to maintain composure, feeling a rush of panic. They had chosen this spot specifically to avoid being discovered, believing Kurono would be occupied elsewhere. They greeted Kurono weakly, attempting a smile, but Kurono was having none of it. He snapped back, refusing to let the listener play dumb. The listener feigned confusion, trying to downplay their excitement. They admitted to being a bit overzealous but insisted they hadn't said anything about becoming a hero. Kurono, however, was adamant. He stepped closer, narrowing his eyes, demanding the truth. The listener felt a mix of frustration and desperation. They wished Kurono would just let them off the hook. Kurono's chuckle was devoid of humor, and he seemed to contemplate his next move. Suddenly, his expression shifted, and he muttered to himself about how Kai would not appreciate this revelation. He decided he would be the one to inform Kai, believing he was doing the right thing. The listener's heart sank further. They tried to dismiss Kurono's claims, asserting that Kai would believe them over him. But Kurono's eyes held a strange glint, a mix of something unsettling. It didn't matter, he had made up his mind. He insisted they would find out what Kai thought for themselves. The listener pleaded with Kurono to stop, feeling a wave of disbelief wash over them. Just moments ago, they had been elated after their training, and now they were desperately clinging to Kurono's leg, trying to pull him back. Kurono sighed, telling them to let go as he effortlessly dragged them along. The blame for having such unrealistic dreams rested solely on you, and Kurono needed to bring you back to reality. You felt the urge to protest, insisting that he was misunderstanding the situation. You were certain that if Kurono mentioned this to Kai, it would lead to trouble for both of you. Despite your pleas, Kurono remained unyielding, his stubbornness matching that of Chisaki, making them a perfect pair with their similar personalities. Feeling cornered, you realized that you had no choice but to act quickly. You were too small and weak to physically confront Kurono, so you decided to reach out to Chisaki first, hoping he would side with you. After all, you were still his beloved little sister, and surely he wouldn't choose a desperate fanboy over you. In a moment of determination, you shouted out a challenge, urging him to catch you. You took off running, feeling as if your life depended on it. But deep down, you knew Chisaki would believe you. He cared for you and wanted what was best for you. However, your hopes were dashed when Kurono swiftly caught up to you. He sighed, commenting on your inability to outrun him and reminded you to watch your language, given your young age. You gritted your teeth, suppressing your retorts while mentally unleashing a torrent of insults. It was truly pathetic to be at odds with someone so much younger. With no other options, you decided to make a scene, hoping to draw attention to Kurono's behavior. Thankfully it worked. Chisaki rushed into the hallway, clearly concerned, having heard your cries. He appeared slightly flushed as he approached, while Kurono looked down at you with a knowing glare. You felt no sympathy for him. He had chosen to engage in this conflict. You feigned distress, rushing into Chisaki's arms, where he enveloped you in a comforting embrace, patting your back and smoothing your hair. You were not genuinely upset, but you were more than willing to put on a show, especially since Kurono seemed intent on making your life difficult. Chisaki reassured you that everything would be all right, his mask hiding a smile that you could sense behind it. However, when he turned to Kurono, his expression shifted to one of anger. He demanded to know what Kurono had done to make you cry, his voice laced with fury. He questioned Kurono's actions, making it clear that he wouldn't tolerate any mistreatment towards you. Kurono, maintaining his calm demeanor, claimed that you were fabricating stories to turn Chisaki against him. Chisaki scoffed at this, unable to believe that you would lie to him. You buried your face in Chisaki's chest, holding back exaggerated sobs as you expressed your confusion about Kurono's sudden hostility. You had thought everyone was getting along, and that Kurono was part of the family, just as Pops had said. Chisaki's anger was palpable, and you could feel him trembling with the urge to confront Kurono. You hoped he would redirect his frustration away from you. Yet Kurono remained unfazed, seemingly oblivious to the gravity of the situation. He casually mentioned that he had overheard you practicing with your quirk and that you had expressed a longing to become a hero. The revelation hung in the air, and you could only hope that Chisaki's love for you would lead him to believe your side of the story. You insisted tearfully that Kurono was mistaken, explaining that you were simply training for fun and that he had twisted your words. You clung to Chisaki, using your undeniable cuteness to sway him. After all, who would side with someone who had just made a child cry? You knew Chisaki valued your words. However, instead of confronting Kurono again, Chisaki stood still, his hand dropping to his side. He looked down at you with his striking golden eyes, a mix of concern and disappointment. He stated that you had been using your quirk again, not phrasing it as a question but as a realization. You flinched slightly, discomfort washing over you as you acknowledged that you had indeed been practicing. You explained that it was just a way to pass the time, like dancing or playing. Chisaki reminded you that he had previously told you not to use your quirk, and it was clear that he was upset. While he might not fully believe Kurono's claims, he still hated seeing you use your abilities, which was why you had started practicing in secret. You felt a pang of guilt for neglecting to consider how your actions might affect him. You apologized, downplaying the situation, insisting that it wasn't a big deal and questioning if you were really expected to never use your quirk again. Chisaki narrowed his eyes, clearly troubled by your response. It was difficult to discern what was going through his mind, but it seemed he was torn between directing his frustration at her or at Kurono. She silently hoped it wouldn't be directed at her. She insisted that she wouldn't use her quirk again, hoping he would accept her weak promise. She expressed her regret, claiming it had been just for fun, but acknowledged that he clearly disapproved. She insisted that Kurono was fabricating stories to provoke him against her, though she couldn't quite understand his motives. Kurono frowned, questioning the logic behind her accusations. He explained that he had no gain from such actions and that he had come to him with this information out of concern. He emphasized that she was harboring unrealistic aspirations about the future, especially given her upbringing. He believed she needed to grasp the boundaries that should not be crossed, especially at her young age. She countered, asserting that he was making things up. Just because she practiced with her quirk didn't mean she aspired to be a hero. She accused him of weaving lies to win Kai's favor, suggesting he was overly fixated on him. Kurono denied any obsession, appearing genuinely offended by the accusation. She retorted with a shocking claim, causing Chisaki to react in disbelief. Kurono sighed, acknowledging that she was speaking without thought. He urged Kai to trust him, reiterating his concern for the 𝗕𝗁𝗢𝗂𝗧𝗂𝗓 and expressing that neither he nor their father would want her to have dangerous dreams. Chisaki remained silent, but she knew he cared for her in his own way. Unfortunately, his aversion to quirks and heroes placed her in a difficult position. Finally, he spoke, expressing uncertainty about Kurono's honesty. He admitted he felt like expelling him from their group but acknowledged her habit of using her quirk despite his warnings. He lamented her longing to remain untainted and urged her to understand that clinging to her quirk would only harm her. Frustration welled within her. She felt unjustly accused, wishing he could see beyond his fears. After all these years, she had hoped he might soften his stance. Now, it seemed she would have to conceal her abilities indefinitely. How could she train her powers or pursue her dream of becoming a hero and saving those in need? It felt unfair. She recognized she should be grateful for her second chance at life, yet she had newfound aspirations. What gave Chisaki the right to hinder her pursuit of happiness? She bit her lip, struggling to hold back tears, feeling the weight of his words. Chisaki crouched before her, placing a hand on her head, a gentle gesture that contrasted sharply with his harsh statements. She stood there, feeling foolish, desperately trying to suppress her emotions. It was no surprise, really. She had long understood Chisaki's nature, but hearing him declare she would never be a hero stung deeply, especially coming from someone she loved so much. Kurono added his voice, urging her to heed her brother. He reminded her of her ties to the Yakuza, emphasizing loyalty to those who had always protected her. Their words felt cruel, especially coming from Chisaki, whom she cherished. It was becoming clear that his happiness might come at the expense of her own, a thought that weighed heavily on her heart. She mumbled an understanding, apologizing for her mistakes. Chisaki opened his mouth, perhaps to soften his tone, but she turned away, needing space. Kurono suggested she might need time alone, advising Chisaki to let her be, believing she would eventually come to her senses. Despite her disdain for Kurono, she appreciated that Chisaki wasn't following her. She sought solitude, slipping out of the 𝗕𝗁𝗢𝗂𝗧𝗂𝗓 compound unnoticed, navigating through a small gap in the gate. The evening darkness provided cover, reducing the chances of being seen. She hadn't fully considered her actions. This wasn't a true escape, she had nowhere else to go, and disappearing at night was hardly a wise choice. Still, she craved a moment of peace. You crave some space to breathe, a moment to use your quirk without anyone judging you. Lifting your hand, you conjure star fragments in your palm, their shiny brilliance illuminating the darkness around you. It's amusing how you wield this superpower merely as a flashlight. If only Chisaki could appreciate the beauty of quirks instead of forcing you to hide them. No family is perfect, but you've been reborn into the world of My Hero Academia, where not wanting to be a hero feels impossible. With the stars guiding your path, you wander aimlessly, relishing the illusion of freedom. However, unbeknownst to you, danger lurks ahead. Your fallout with Chisaki has set the stage, and you are unwittingly approaching a critical moment. Suddenly, a voice cuts through the night, recognizing you. You turn, only to find yourself restrained, an arm pinning your back and a hand covering your mouth. A familiar face looms over you, a man from your past who had once targeted you. He taunts you, recalling the humiliation he faced years ago, and his anger has resurfaced. You realize with dread that you are completely alone. Chisaki is not there to protect you. You attempt to scream, but your cries are muffled, and the street is deserted. The man's size and strength overpower you, and despite your struggles, he holds you firmly. He speaks of fate, his breath hot against your ear, revealing his longing for revenge. You can hardly believe this is happening. All you wanted was a moment to clear your mind, yet here you are, facing a nightmare. You wish you had been more cautious, but in your emotional state, you never anticipated this encounter. Determined not to give in, you fight back with all your strength. In a burst of adrenaline, you manage to create some space and bite down on his fingers. He recoils in pain, giving you a fleeting chance to escape, but he retaliates swiftly, kicking your legs out from under you. You fall, and before you can recover, he forces your head against the ground. A familiar sensation washes over you, one you had hoped to never feel again. You sense the coldness creeping in, a reminder of a past trauma. Tears slip down your cheeks as you realize the gravity of your situation. You never imagined facing such a painful fate again. Yet, even as despair looms, you refuse to surrender. Your hand trembles as you conjure a few more star fragments, their beauty shining in the darkness. This life has been shorter than the last, and you feel a deep sorrow for the goals you will never achieve. Despite the unfairness, you cherish the connections you've made, knowing that your family will remember you. But the truth is, you want to live. Desperation fills your heart as you let out a few more whimpers, the stars in your palm fading away, and your eyelids grow heavy. Once again, death seems to claim you, but not for long. You awaken with a gasp, disoriented, and find yourself gazing up at Chisaki. Tears fill his eyes, and he pulls you close, sobbing quietly. He seems unable to calm down, even when he realizes you are awake. He speaks your name, his voice thick with emotion as he apologizes for leaving you alone. You blink, still in shock, but then you notice something remarkable. There is no pain. Hesitantly, you touch your head, expecting to feel injury, but your fingers come away clean. You are unharmed. Even though that terrible man nearly harmed you earlier, you feel as if you're completely restored. It becomes clear to you that Chisaki's quirk has just saved your life. He reassures you, pulling you close and gently rocking you back and forth, though you can't tell if he's trying to calm you or himself. What truly matters is that you are alive. In this world, people possess incredible abilities, such as healing others from the brink of death, or in Chisaki's case, reviving them entirely. Your beloved older brother is here for you. He may not be perfect and can be a bit difficult at times, but with him by your side, you know you will never have to feel afraid. You breathe out his name, a warm smile spreading across your face, but the words get stuck in your throat. You begin to tremble uncontrollably. There is a lifeless body nearby. The man who attacked you lies motionless on the ground, and the sight is overwhelming. You start to hyperventilate, feeling a wave of horror wash over you. Chisaki notices your distress and follows your gaze. When he realizes what you're looking at, he responds nonchalantly, saying he was worried you might still be in pain. A wave of nausea hits you, and before you can stop it, you double over. Chisaki pats your back, showing no sign of disgust despite his usual aversion to germs. He encourages you to let it all out, understanding that you must be surprised. He suggests you avoid looking at the body. You wipe your mouth with your sleeve and whimper, asking him what he did. Chisaki frowns as if the answer should be obvious, explaining that he dealt with the man to protect you and fixed you up right away. You shudder at the realization that he is dead, and though you want to look away, you steal another glance at the still figure on the ground. You tell Chisaki he killed him, and he barely reacts, responding simply with indifference. You express your disbelief, insisting that taking a life is wrong and pleading with him to fix the man, fearing the consequences if he dies. Chisaki stares at you, questioning why you care. You explain that killing is wrong and beg him to help the man, suggesting they could call the police. He firmly reminds you that they are part of the Yakuza and that they cannot rely on anyone else. He believes the world is better off without someone who harms others for pleasure. You agree that the man is not a good person, but you cannot condone murder. You remind Chisaki that their father would not approve of this action, emphasizing that it could be reversible with his quirk. You express your concern that their father would not be okay with knowing he killed someone, regardless of the reason. Chisaki grimaces, and you feel a sense of relief as he acknowledges your point. You encourage him to fix the man and assure him that their father has people who can handle the situation. This way, Chisaki's hands remain clean. You grasp his hands tightly, fighting back tears, reminding him that he is not a villain. He acted to protect you, and now that you are safe, he can restore everything to its rightful place. Chisaki affirms that he will not kill the man. He stands up, removes one of his gloves, and approaches the lifeless body, using his quirk to restore the man. The man awakens with a gasp, confusion in his eyes. You hope that Chisaki will restrain him so he can be taken back to their father, who will know how to handle the situation. Even if the 𝗕𝗁𝗂𝗧𝗏 is not all-powerful, their father has connections, and this man will have to face consequences for his actions. Whatever happens next is not for Chisaki to decide. He should not carry that burden. He deserves to live a carefree life, free from darkness. However, as Chisaki stares down at the man, who begins to plead for mercy, his expression grows colder. He repeats that he will not kill him, but there is a pause, and then his eyes widen with intensity. He declares that just because he won't kill him does not mean he won't face punishment for his actions. You realize you cannot protest fast enough. Chisaki's quirk begins to work on the man, but this time, you can tell he is being careful, ensuring his victim remains conscious and alive. He dismantled a few parts, taking a moment to listen to the man's cries and pleas, then restored him completely and repeated the process. The man screamed for a while, but within moments, everything returned to normal, only for Chisaki to continue inflicting pain on him again and again. Chisaki had warned against watching, but the screams were impossible to ignore, leaving you frozen in place. The longer you observed, the more your senses dulled. In a desperate effort to maintain your sanity, you tried to convince yourself that none of this was real. After all, it was the world of My Hero Academia. It couldn't possibly be real. But it wasn't real. Chisaki repeatedly hurting someone right before your eyes. There was no way that could actually be happening. A few tears rolled down your cheeks, and as you felt them dampen your skin, you realized you had failed to convince yourself otherwise. Chisaki glared at the man, his clothes and hands stained, his face marred. Normally, he would have been appalled, but he was too far gone to care. He expressed his disdain, declaring that degenerates like him belonged in the dirt. He was furious that this man had dared to lay a hand on you. All you could do was watch, your body numb, unable to muster the strength to stand. No matter what you thought or said, Chisaki wouldn't stop. He had chosen to harm someone not out of necessity or self-defense, but purely out of his own longing. And it was all because of you. This wouldn't have happened if you hadn't slipped up around Kurono or if you had hidden your quirk better. If only you had stayed inside instead of running off. Chisaki's actions stemmed from your mistakes. After a moment, Chisaki finally stepped back. The man lay unconscious but alive, altered from how he used to be. Chisaki had paralyzed his legs, believing he deserved to be disabled for. He assured you that he hadn't killed anyone and that this punishment was light compared to what the man had done to you. He suggested returning inside, where he would inform Pops about the situation, and they would find a place to dispose of this man. You couldn't respond. Your body felt heavy, and when Chisaki crouched beside you, you gritted your teeth, unable to look away. He offered a sympathetic smile, apologizing for the difficulty of the situation, but insisted it was necessary. Bad people needed to be punished, and the worst crime was daring to hurt you. He had already let this man off easy the first time. Sometimes, pain was the only way to make people understand. You remained silent, and instead of waiting for a reaction, Chisaki lifted you into his arms. He pressed a kiss to your forehead, which felt strange against your cold skin. You were alive. Until now, you thought regret would only come if you died before achieving anything. But you were wrong. You feared that Chisaki could never change. He informed Pops that this man had tried to kill you, recalling that he had attacked you years ago and had once been part of the 𝗕𝗁𝗂𝗧𝗏. Pops looked down at the former gangster, whose lips were taped shut and whose legs were broken from Chisaki's quirk. He was incapable of escape, reduced to whimpering and begging for mercy, though no one could understand his muffled words. Pops recognized him, his voice cold and stern. He had deemed this man unworthy of the 𝗕𝗁𝗂𝗧𝗏 name, but never imagined he would attempt to harm a child. It was utterly sickening. You remained quiet as 𝗧𝗏𝗃 held you close, even though the man was no longer a threat. It was true that he deserved punishment for trying to kill you and for bringing back painful memories you had tried to forget. He should suffer, yet the way 𝗧𝗏𝗃 had tortured him just for the sake of it felt deeply wrong. 𝗧𝗏𝗃 suggested disposing of him, even proposing to rearrange his vocal cords so he could never speak of this to anyone. He wanted to throw him somewhere he would know nothing but pain for the rest of his life. Pops narrowed his eyes, a man of honor, yet still a yakuza. This criminal had tried to harm his precious daughter, and the punishment would not be light. He assured 𝗧𝗏𝗃 that he would take care of it and that the man wouldn't get off easy. Death would have been a more merciful fate. The man began to whine hopelessly, his voice muffled behind the tape. You clenched your jaw, glancing at him from the corner of your eye, remembering how quickly he had attacked you, showing no guilt as he watched you suffer. He wasn't a good person. He deserved this. Perhaps 𝗧𝗏𝗃 was justified in his actions. Yet, you couldn't shake the feeling of fear. Pops instructed Kurono to take the man away, wanting to ensure you were all right first. Kurono nodded and dragged the incapacitated man from the room, despite his attempts to scream and fight back. The sound of his muffled cries faded into the background until you could no longer hear them. Pops crouched down, grasping your shoulders. He expressed his sorrow for what had happened to you, pulling you into a tight embrace. You could feel him trembling, despite his efforts to remain composed. He was a powerful man, yet he loved you fiercely and must have been terrified. In Pop's arms you felt safe. Despite being a yakuza, he knew how to stay calm and control his anger. His first instinct was never to respond with violence or threats. Even after such a serious incident, he didn't give in to rage. He refused to let it destroy his humanity. In that regard, he and 𝗧𝗏𝗃 were completely different. It was clear what kind of person 𝗧𝗏𝗃 was. All this time, there had been hope for change. Efforts were made to show him the beauty of the world, to reassure him that there was no sickness plaguing nearly the entire population. Love and affection were offered, hoping to guide him away from a life filled with violence, manipulation, and darkness. However, this incident revealed everything that needed to be known. 𝗧𝗏𝗃's love was intense and obsessive, taken to an extreme. There had been glimpses of this before, but it was easy to dismiss them as overthinking. It was easy to convince oneself that everything would turn out fine in the end. 𝗧𝗏𝗃 loved so deeply that he would go to great lengths for that love, without a second thought. For some, this might be comforting, a sense of safety. There was a saying that if one truly cared for someone, they would do anything to protect them, just like a mother would for her child. But the reality of the situation was clear, and it was known how 𝗧𝗏𝗃 treated those he loved, including Pops. Staying there could lead to paranoia, and the thought of being trapped in a situation where harm could come was terrifying. 𝗧𝗏𝗃 wasn't evil. He believed everything he did was for the sake of love. Yet, he was delusional, and that delusion could be just as dangerous if left unchecked. Pops reassured, stroking hair gently, trying to provide comfort. It was hard to imagine the fear that had been felt. He offered to do anything to fix the situation, to restore a sense of safety. But deep down, it was understood that there was little he could do now. It felt too late. Every time eyes met 𝗧𝗏𝗃's, a wave of unease washed over. In that moment, a decision had been made. It was time to leave. 𝗧𝗏𝗃 declared he would put Name to bed, recognizing the shock and the need for rest. He lifted her effortlessly, and Pops offered a warm smile as they moved through the halls. Eventually, Name found herself lowered into bed, with 𝗧𝗏𝗃 sitting at the edge. A chill ran down her spine as she realized how quickly things had changed. Not long ago, she had felt completely at ease around him, but now everything was different. 𝗧𝗏𝗃 acknowledged the weight of the situation, holding her hand gently, tracing his thumb over her knuckles. He promised that he would never let her out of his sight again, vowing to be there every moment of the day. He believed that his strength was a shield against the evils of the world, and he would protect his family at all costs. No one would take her from him. He wrapped his arms around her, trembling slightly as he held her close. There was sympathy for him, He had witnessed something horrific that night, losing someone dear. But even with that understanding, his next words confirmed the deepest fears. 𝗧𝗧𝗏 suggested that she should always stay inside, declaring the outside world too dangerous. He proposed a hidden place, an underground area built long ago, where she would be safe and out of sight. The description echoed the treatment of 𝗕𝗓𝗢, locked away and isolated. 𝗧𝗧𝗏's love was evident, but it felt toxic, and 𝗕𝗏 refused to let him ruin the new life she had been given. He mentioned working out the details later, assuring her that staying there would ease his mind. As he left the room, he kissed her forehead, and it took all her strength not to recoil. He smiled, seemingly unfazed by the weight of his words. Pulling the blanket up to her nose, she let the tears flow. It wasn't long before sobs filled the room. As promised, 𝗧𝗧𝗏 was there first thing in the morning. He greeted her with a gentle smile, his mask lowered, and rubbed the sleep from his eyes. The sweetness of the gesture contrasted sharply with the fear he had instilled. He asked how she was feeling, and though she replied that she was all right, it was a lie. She was not foolish enough to reveal her true thoughts. 𝗧𝗧𝗏 adjusted his mask and patted her head, expressing relief that she seemed in better spirits. He acknowledged his mistake, promising that it wouldn't happen again, assuring her that she would be safe from then on. His intentions were good, but the comfort she once felt by his side had vanished. He suggested they go eat, and the morning unfolded as expected, with 𝗧𝗧𝗏 keeping a watchful eye on her, as if she were a precious treasure that needed constant protection. Previously, the attention you received might have felt flattering, but now it only made you uneasy. You finally recognized his obsession for what it truly was, something distorted and unnatural. If you didn't confront this soon, you feared you might end up trapped like 𝗕𝗓𝗢 or in a state of despair like 𝗵𝗃𝗲. 𝗧𝗧𝗏 questioned your departure, pulling you back by the arm as you attempted to step away. Despite his claims of wanting to protect you, his grip was unyielding and painful. You expressed your longing to see 𝗵𝗃𝗲, and he insisted on accompanying you. You reassured him that it was a minor matter, and that 𝗵𝗃𝗲 would take care of you. After a moment of hesitation, he reluctantly accepted that you would be safe with 𝗵𝗃𝗲 and instructed you to meet him in his room afterward, warning that he would come looking for you if you took too long. Once he walked away, you finally felt a sense of relief, but you knew time was of the essence. Initially, you considered fleeing, but you quickly realized that 𝗧𝗧𝗏 would catch you easily, and being caught would mean losing the last remnants of your freedom. The 𝗕𝗓𝗁𝗧𝗏 residence was filled with too many watchful eyes, and your previous escape had been a mere slide of luck. You needed to leave this life behind, but first, you had to be honest. Approaching 𝗵𝗃𝗲, you swallowed nervously as he greeted you with a smile, asking if you felt better. He had intended to visit you but had been occupied with paperwork. You took a deep breath and indicated that there was something important you wanted to discuss. He leaned forward, attentive and patient, but your mind was racing with anxiety. Was this truly the right decision? What if it turned out worse than you feared? Yet, considering the alternative and the dangers of remaining there, you finally found the courage to voice your thoughts. You declared that you could no longer stay. Instantly, 𝗵𝗃𝗲's smile faded, replaced by confusion. He inquired if your feelings were related to the previous night's events, acknowledging the terror you had faced. He assured you that they were there to protect you from harm and that 𝗧𝗧𝗏's quirk would keep you safer than anywhere else. But you knew better. While 𝗧𝗧𝗏's power was formidable, it was precisely that which made him a threat. A person so unstable wielding such strength was a recipe for disaster. Realizing you hadn't changed him only intensified your fear. You shared your thoughts about the dangers of the Yakuza life, recounting how someone had tried to harm you simply for being part of their group. You expressed your lack of safety and your inability to continue living in such an environment. 𝗵𝗃𝗲 remained silent for a while, his brows furrowed in concern as he fidgeted with his thumbs. Eventually, he murmured that they loved you and that family sticks together through difficult times. This made your heart ache even more. You replied, your voice trembling, that you loved him too, but you couldn't continue. The memory of the previous night haunted you, and you feared it could happen again. Even if 𝗧𝗧𝗏 could save you, you never wanted to endure such pain again. You hoped he would understand. 𝗵𝗃𝗲 was different from 𝗧𝗧𝗏, which was why 𝗧𝗧𝗏 had put him in a vulnerable state. They had clashing worldviews and morals, leading to a tragic outcome. Now, you were placing your trust in Pop's kindness, hoping he would recognize what was best for you, even if it hurt him. After a deep, reluctant sigh, Pops admitted that he should apologize. He reflected on how he had failed to see that the life he had chosen was unsuitable for a child. He acknowledged that Chisaki was ambitious and ruthless, but you were gentle and full of life, deserving of a brighter world, not one shrouded in darkness. You protested that it wasn't his fault and that you didn't blame either of them, but you simply couldn't handle the dangers surrounding you. Pops affirmed that you were just a child, one with a big heart, who belonged in the light. He stood up from his desk and approached you, extending a slow, tentative hand. It seemed as though he was waiting for a sign of hesitation, a clear rejection. But this was not rejection, it was still love. For now, it felt like the right decision, and Pops appeared to understand that too. He expressed his regret for trying to dissuade the choice, gently brushing his thumb against the cheek. He shared how much he loved and appreciated having you around, admitting that he had acted selfishly, placing his needs above yours. He acknowledged the pain you had endured the previous night, recognizing that if you had grown up in a different environment, you might not have faced such suffering. He took responsibility for taking your happiness for granted, feeling he could never fully make it up to you. You reassured him that it was not his fault, explaining that every family was unique. You believed that, for now, it would be better to be somewhere else, at least until you grew older and stronger. You promised to return, affirming that he and Kai would always be your family. Pops smiled, a hint of sadness in his expression, but you could see he believed in your words. No matter what, the three of you would always be family. He invited you closer, pulling you into a warm embrace. You melted into his touch, resting your face against the fabric of his kimono. Pops was a good man, and you would miss him dearly. However, if you truly wanted to protect everyone's futures, his, Chisaki's, and Eri's, you needed the freedom to act. This was only temporary. Eri had not even been born yet. You intended to use this time wisely, to strengthen yourself, and when the moment was right, you would find a way to set things right. But for now, your safety had to come first. So, you would leave even if it meant breaking Chisaki's heart. The following morning, you stood before the 𝗓𝗓 Hasaikai's front door, ready to embark on a new journey. You had packed a few essentials, but there was little you truly needed, and you doubted you would have much space to yourself anyway. Once again, you were headed to an orphanage, but this time, it was your choice. You had thought long and hard about this decision. Initially, you considered living with Eri's mother, believing it would allow you to watch over Eri more closely and ensure she was well cared for. However, even though Eri's mother lived separately from Pops, she was still connected to the Yakuza, and Chisaki would know where to find her. You needed to be as far away from him as possible. If you lived with Eri's mother, there was a chance he might come and take you back by force, endangering anyone who stood in his way. Living with Eri's family could cause more harm than good, and that was a risk you were unwilling to take. You needed distance, a place where Chisaki could not simply appear and cause chaos. An orphanage seemed to be the best option, somewhere far away, where strangers could not easily come and go unnoticed. Chisaki might be ruthless, but he was not foolish. Surely he wouldn't just walk into an orphanage and take you in broad daylight. You hoped he wasn't that reckless. You also realized that becoming a hero with a Yakuza background would be challenging. Despite the love you held for Pops and Chisaki, it was wise to address the situation as quickly as possible. You needed a fresh start for many reasons. Finally, the moment had arrived. After more than 8 years, this place had been your home, and today, you were leaving it all behind. You fiddled with your bag straps, trying to swallow the lump in your throat. Even though you had made this choice for yourself, uncertainty loomed over you. You had no idea what awaited you in the vast world outside. The 𝗓𝗓 Hasaikai may not have been the most conventional upbringing, but it was all you had ever known. Still, there was no point in overthinking it. Leaving was the sensible choice, and you had already made up your mind. Pops frowned, asking if you were sure you didn't want to say goodbye to Chisaki. You shook your head vigorously, insisting it was better this way. You knew he wouldn't take the news well, and even if it seemed cowardly, you didn't want to witness his reaction. You promised to write letters to both of them from time to time, assuring them you would stay in touch. Pops acknowledged that 𝗧𝗧𝗏 would be upset, but agreed that he probably wouldn't handle the news well. He opened the door, and you stepped outside, lifting your gaze to the bright sky. It was an appealing day, filling you with hope for the future. You barely took 5 steps out the door when you found yourself facing a pair of trembling golden eyes. 𝗧𝗧𝗏 had just entered the compound, followed closely by Kurono, who wore a guilty expression. He questioned what was happening, pointing at your bag and asking where you were going. Your heart raced in panic. Pops had promised that 𝗧𝗧𝗏 would be gone for a while, and Kurono was supposed to keep him occupied with a quick errand. Kurono, looking apologetic, explained that he had tried to distract 𝗧𝗧𝗏, but he insisted on returning home to ensure your safety. Frustration bubbled within you. Kurono had once again proven to be a thorn in your side. He had revealed your plans to 𝗧𝗧𝗏 the other night, and if that hadn't happened, perhaps your safe, happy home wouldn't have unraveled so quickly. 𝗧𝗧𝗏 glanced between you and Pops, piecing the situation together in disbelief. He questioned why you had tried to get him out of the house, expressing confusion over your intentions. Pops sighed, urging 𝗧𝗧𝗏 to listen carefully and not to get upset. He explained that you were leaving and asked him to act his age and let you pass. 𝗧𝗧𝗏 repeated the word, leaving, struggling to comprehend. He insisted that wherever you needed to go, he could accompany you, as he was the one who usually looked after you. He questioned why you hadn't wanted him to know about your departure. Pops reiterated that you were leaving and would no longer be living there. 𝗧𝗧𝗏 froze, and instinctively, you stepped back, seeking refuge behind Pop's arm. He finally processed the information, expressing disbelief that you would not be living there anymore. If this situation revolved around what that terrible person did to her, there would be a vow that it would never happen again. 𝗧𝗧𝗏 needed to understand that she had to leave. Recent events had shown that this was not a safe environment for a young girl, and 𝗵 was deeply frightened. It was essential to respect her wishes and allow her to find a new home. The anxiety was overwhelming, and it felt impossible to keep from trembling. This was precisely what had been hoped to avoid. How could escape be possible now? 𝗧𝗧𝗏 was determined not to let her go. Her life felt like it was already over. 𝗧𝗧𝗏 insisted that 𝗵 wasn't going anywhere. He approached her with intensity, and she clung to Pop's sleeve, fighting back tears. When he grabbed her hand, she flinched, prompting a startled reaction from him. Pops narrowed his eyes and pushed 𝗧𝗧𝗏 back, admonishing him for his disgraceful behavior. He emphasized the importance of respecting 𝗵's wishes, reminding 𝗧𝗧𝗏 that if he truly cared for her safety, he would understand the necessity of her leaving. The Yakuza lifestyle was far too dangerous for her, and she deserved a life free from such threats. 𝗧𝗧𝗏 protested, claiming that this wasn't what 𝗵 wanted. His eyes were wide with desperation as he looked at her, urging her to confirm his belief. Instead of responding, she shut her eyes tightly, gripping Pops more firmly and wishing for the situation to resolve quickly. Her silence spoke volumes to 𝗧𝗧𝗏. He gasped, confusion evident in his voice as he questioned why this was happening. He clenched his fists, frustration boiling over as he declared that he was the one who knew how to protect her. He believed that she would be safer with him, and he was adamant that she wouldn't leave. When he grabbed her again, it was with more force, and she cried out, struggling to break free. But he was far stronger, and it felt like a futile effort. Then, a loud smack echoed in the air, and 𝗧𝗧𝗏 blinked in shock, realizing that Pops had just struck him. Pops commanded him to behave, pointing out that he was frightening 𝗵. He expressed disappointment in 𝗧𝗧𝗏's actions, reminding him that family should always look out for one another. If this was 𝗵's choice, he needed to support her, even if it meant sacrificing his own desires. 𝗧𝗧𝗏 stood in stunned silence, while Kurono, behind him, seemed eager to escape the tension. He muttered that he hadn't said anything wrong, pressing a hand against his cheek to confirm the reality of the pain. He glared at Pops, arguing that family should stick together and that 𝗵 needed them to survive. Pops remained firm, asserting that 𝗵 wasn't suited for the Yakuza lifestyle. They had already made one mistake, and that was too much. It only took one misstep to ruin a child's life, and he couldn't blame her for feeling unsafe. He demanded that 𝗧𝗧𝗏 step aside, reiterating that he wouldn't ask again. In the past, 𝗧𝗧𝗏 had revered 𝗵's words, respecting his authority. But when 𝗵 refused to support his plan, 𝗧𝗧𝗏 had resorted to forceful measures to silence him. The current situation felt like it was heading in that same direction. 𝗧𝗧𝗏's voice trembled as he called 𝗕𝗵𝗲's name, his heart heavy with emotion. He pleaded with her to tell 𝗵 he was wrong, insisting that they needed to be together. Tears filled his eyes, a testament to how much he cared for her. She felt an overwhelming sense of guilt, knowing that 𝗧𝗧𝗏 had only ever cried because of her. She wanted to comfort him, to assure him that she would never leave, but she understood that this change was necessary. With determination, she declared that she was leaving. She felt a pang of sorrow as she explained that she was too scared to stay. The last thread of 𝗧𝗧𝗏's composure snapped, tears streaming down his face as he prepared to remove his gloves. In that moment, it seemed everything was about to unravel. She had fought so hard for so long, but now it felt futile. 𝗧𝗧𝗏 had been her first real connection, the foundation of her hopes and dreams. It felt almost poetic that he would be the one to shatter them. Yet he didn't act on his impulse. Despite the turmoil, he refrained from using his quirk to control the situation. Whether it was a flicker of humanity or an inability to harm her directly, he stopped himself from taking that step. After wiping his tears, he composed himself, and when he looked back at her, his expression had shifted dramatically. He seethed, allowing his anger to surface as he told her to leave if that was what she truly wanted. He accused her of abandoning her family, expressing his hurt and betrayal. His final words dripped with disdain, and he stormed past her, retreating into the house. A shuddering gasp escaped her lips, and she silently wept, relieved to still be safe. 𝗵 offered her a sympathetic smile and stroked her hair, assuring her that 𝗧𝗧𝗏 was just upset and that he would eventually realize that letting her go was the right decision. However, she wasn't so sure. Deep down, she feared that he would carry this resentment for a long time. But she couldn't afford to hesitate any longer. 𝗧𝗧𝗏 had spared her, and it would be unwise to waste this chance. 𝗵 declared it was time to go. Taking a few deep breaths to steady oneself, the character nodded in response and glanced back over their shoulder, absorbing the scene one last time. It marked the end of an era, the final chapter of their time with the 𝗕𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁. Yet, as one chapter closed, another was bound to begin. The feeling was bittersweet, with a lingering wish for more changes, but it was the actions taken from this point forward that truly mattered. A farewell for now, but there was no need for despair. After all, life was just beginning. This was certainly not the last encounter with 𝗧𝗧𝗏 in this tale, but now the focus shifted to the main storyline, where the character would interact with the rest of the BNHA cast. The relationship with 𝗧𝗧𝗏 would continue to be an important plot point, influencing certain canon events, making the previous chapters feel like a prelude to the main narrative. The character held a fondness for him, ensuring he would make more appearances. If there was a silver lining to this situation, it was that the character had found themselves in a decent orphanage this time. Gone were the days of spoiled sandwiches that caused stomach aches and near food poisoning, and negligent caregivers who overlooked the children in chaotic situations, like when 𝗧𝗧𝗏 had tied them to trees, making it a long wait for help to arrive. While it couldn't compare to the 𝗕𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁, where they had a spacious room, plenty of good food and fancy clothes, along with a large courtyard for running around, at least here, safety from 𝗧𝗧𝗏 was a significant improvement. The orphanage was quite large, primarily due to the number of children it accommodated. The character shared a room with 3 older girls who whispered their conversations to avoid sharing anything inappropriate. It was amusing, considering their real mental age was closer to 16, but they let the girls talk about their crushes in hushed tones as much as they liked. Admittedly, it was a big change from the life they had known. After living with 𝗧𝗧𝗏 and 𝗵 for roughly 8 years, the decision to prioritize safety brought a sense of homesickness. However, while in this new environment, the character was determined to make the most of it. Now that they were no longer part of the Yakuza, there was finally a chance to make real friends. One of the roommates expressed frustration over their homework, lamenting that it was too difficult to finish in time for the next day. At 14 years old, she was 4 years older than the character physically, but still younger than they had been when they passed away in their previous life. The material she struggled with was something the character was already familiar with. Leaning closer to the desk, the character tilted their head and pointed out a mistake in the calculations. Offering to help, they explained the steps clearly. Initially, the girl frowned, unconvinced, but as the explanation continued, her doubt began to fade. Eventually, she grasped the concept, expressing disbelief at the character's ability to solve the problem. The character brushed off the compliment, feeling a sense of pride swell within. Across the room, the other two girls watched with curiosity, asking if the character could assist them with their homework as well. A grin spread across the character's face as they eagerly agreed. Embracing their reputation as a prodigy, the character found joy in helping others with their studies. It had significantly improved their social life, allowing them to connect with many children at the orphanage. Despite the wonderful life they had with Chisaki and Pops, friendship had been something they lacked. Overall, the transition was going smoothly. Thoughts of Chisaki and Pops crossed their mind daily, and it was clear their absence was felt, but distance was necessary for everyone involved. There was hope that Chisaki would find peace in the meantime, and when they met again, he would be more composed. However, that felt like a distant dream. Regardless, the character resolved to focus on themselves for a change, which was the reason for leaving in the first place. They would confront the aftermath later, once they were strong enough to face it without fear. One of the caregivers approached, mentioning plans to enroll the character in public school along with the other kids. However, upon recognizing their giftedness, it seemed sending them there would be a waste. The caregiver explained that a nearby private school offered a superior curriculum. While typically requiring payment, the orphanage lacked the resources to fund such an endeavor. Yet, if the character took a special test for admission, they could attend and receive the education they deserved. Though it sounded like more trouble than it was worth, the caregiver's hopeful demeanor made it hard to decline. Attending a private school might be an exciting opportunity, perhaps even increasing the chances of getting into you. The character nodded in agreement, deciding to take the test with hopes of passing. The caregiver clapped her hands together, beaming with excitement as she promised to contact the school. She expressed confidence in the character's abilities, assuring them they would succeed. The character silently agreed, knowing they were not an actual 10-year-old. However, that was a thought best kept to themselves. Even though it may not be clear to you yet, you will always be grateful for your choice to accept her invitation and attend the private school. Fate has much in store for you, some good, some bad, but regardless, you will ensure that you accomplish your goals and leave your mark. Feeling lost, you reflect on how you ended up in this situation. One moment, you were on a field trip with some other children from the orphanage, and the next, you had wandered off to explore something that caught your attention, only to find that they had disappeared. Frustration bubbled within you as you realized that no one seemed to have noticed your absence. You had thought you were becoming popular among them. Perhaps it was a bit foolish to rely on a group of children who were often more distracted than you. Still, the unfamiliar surroundings only added to your anxiety, and you couldn't see or hear any sign of your group. You reminded yourself to stay calm. You were capable and could retrace your steps, or at least find someone willing to help guide you. So, you began walking back the way you came, keeping an eye out for any sign of your friends. It was the sensible thing to do, the advice given to kids when they got lost. Yet, despite how talented others believed you to be, you often found yourself making hasty decisions. This time, however, it wasn't entirely your fault. A sound caught your attention, igniting a spark of excitement within you. Did you just hear what you thought you did? You rushed toward the source, your small legs carrying you as fast as they could. The wind whipped through your hair, stinging your cheeks and eyes, but the thrill of the chase made it all worthwhile. Then you found them. There they were, whether you considered them childhood friends, rivals, or two boys with a complicated relationship, it didn't matter. They were the two most significant characters in the entire series, standing right before you, Izuku and Katsuki. You had met both of them years ago and had thought it would take much longer to see them again. Getting lost had turned out to be a surprising blessing. Without pausing to think about what to say, you bounded over to them, your excitement evident in your wide grin. There were a few other boys with them, neighborhood kids no doubt, but you paid them no mind as you dove into their group, unaware of any embarrassment. Katsuki made a snide remark about Izuku, who appeared dejected, ready to shed tears. However, your sudden arrival startled everyone, and they turned to you, watching as you caught your breath. After a moment, you managed to compose yourself, your smile unwavering. You called out to Izuku, expressing your hope that he remembered you. You realized it was a long shot. After all, he had been just a toddler back then. Yet, that incredible first meeting replayed in your mind, and you couldn't shake the excitement of having met Midoriya Izuku, the protagonist of the story. To your delight, he did remember you. His surprised reaction made you squeal with joy. Not only was he adorable, but the fact that he recalled your name after all this time meant you had made a significant impression. You expressed your happiness at his memory, marveling at the coincidence of meeting again. Izuku, unsure of how to respond, looked down, a blush creeping onto his freckled cheeks as he shyly greeted you. You insisted that he was not plain and that you recognized him immediately. Then, you turned to Katsuki, still beaming, and asked if he still had the All Might figurine you had given him. You remembered that he hadn't shared his name with you, so you held back from addressing him too casually. Yet, he stared at you in awe, suggesting he remembered you as well. He feigned ignorance about the figurine, but you could tell he was trying to hide his embarrassment. Undeterred, you continued to express how wonderful it was to see them again, sharing that it was a coincidence you had stumbled upon them. Just then, a caregiver called out to you, sounding frantic. She rushed over, grabbing your arm firmly, clearly worried about your safety. She expressed her concern, explaining how she had been worried sick and reminded you of the importance of staying with the group. You felt a twinge of guilt for causing her distress. You apologized, explaining that you had lost track of the group but had run into some familiar faces. The caregiver insisted it was time to leave, shaking her head in disbelief. You felt disappointed that you had to go so soon. You had wanted to spend more time with Izuku and Katsuki, especially now that you were no longer tied down by Chisaki. However, you felt hopeful knowing how to reach their neighborhood, believing there would be more chances to meet them in the future. As you waved goodbye, you promised to return, laughter escaping you despite the trouble you were in. The caregiver encouraged the child to look forward to the day, gently pulling them away until they became a small figure in the distance. The sound of the child's joyful laughter lingered, capturing the attention of Izuku and Katsuki, who found themselves more invested in it than they would admit. Before the child arrived, the two were engaged in yet another argument, but the presence of the newcomer caused them to pause and stare at each other in disbelief. Katsuki asked if Izuku knew the child, to which Izuku responded with a hesitant acknowledgement. A silence fell between them, broken eventually by Katsuki's observation that the child was a bit strange. Izuku, initially ready to defend the child, found himself agreeing. For the first time in years, they shared a mutual understanding, all thanks to the child's innocent charm. 10 years had passed since the child was reborn into this world, and now they were about to attend school for the first time. While homeschooling had been part of their life, it hardly felt relevant given the vast difference between their physical and mental ages. Despite not having loved school in their previous life, the child felt a thrill at the prospect of starting anew. Life had changed significantly since leaving the 𝗧𝗵𝗲, and now they had the chance to experience a normal childhood. The caregiver reassured the child, smoothing down their uniform and commenting on how adorable they looked in their grade school outfit. She seemed to believe the child was nervous, having come to assert them on this important day. However, the child felt calm and collected, knowing they were ready for this new adventure. The caregiver praised the child's positive attitude and wrapped them in a warm hug, expressing her understanding of how overwhelming a new environment could be. While she tried to be comforting, it was clear that she was the one feeling anxious. The child found it endearing how much she cared. With a confident grin, the child playfully predicted how the teachers would rave about them, imagining their excitement over having such a bright and cute student. The caregiver laughed, her worries easing as she wiped away tears of joy, wishing the child the best for their first day. As the time came for the caregiver to leave, she waved goodbye, and the child waited with their homeroom teacher, who would guide them into the classroom for introductions. The teacher smiled down, expressing excitement about the new classmate, especially one as intelligent as the child. The child felt a surge of pride at the teacher's words, already feeling like the best. When it was time to enter the classroom, the child was instructed to relax and say a few words for everyone to get to know them. However, as they stood at the front, ready to make a memorable impression, they found themselves momentarily speechless. Instead of introducing themselves, they were captivated by the sight of 𝗳𝗏𝗁𝗍𝗁 sitting in the class. The teacher gently nudged the child, encouraging them to speak. Still in awe, the child struggled to find their voice. They had known they were in the world of My Hero Academia, having already encountered several key characters, but seeing another one so soon left them astonished. Finally, the child introduced themselves, acknowledging their background of being homeschooled and expressing a longing to make friends and learn new things. They shared a fun fact about their love for cold soba, which caught Dshudo's attention, prompting him to look up from his desk. This moment felt significant, as the child realized that attending this school was a pivotal decision. The child never anticipated meeting so many familiar faces so early on. They had assumed it would be a while before encountering anyone from UA, but they were delighted by this unexpected turn of events. Recognizing that Dshudo needed a friend, the child resolved to be that supportive companion, ready to offer the love and encouragement he deserved in light of his challenging family situation. During recess, the child approached Dshudo with a bright smile, unabashedly introducing themselves. Dshudo responded with a simple greeting, but his demeanor suggested he was not ready for more interaction, retreating slightly in his chair. While many might have felt hurt by such aloofness, the child remained undeterred, determined to break through Dshudo's walls and forge a friendship that could bring light into his life. Dshudo had always distanced himself from others, and throughout his time at UA, he had likely pushed everyone away. He probably assumed that you would take the hint and leave him alone, allowing him to enjoy his solitude. However, little did he know that you were accustomed to dealing with difficult personalities. After all, for many years, you had managed to handle 𝗧𝗵𝗵 at pushing others away. When it came to navigating emotionally guarded individuals, you were practically an expert. You approached him with unwavering determination, introducing yourself and expressing your longing to make friends. You mentioned that it was your first day and that you were eager to get to know as many people as possible. You introduced yourself as name and asked for his name. He stared at you for a few moments, perhaps wondering why you were still engaging with him, especially since the rest of the class seemed content to keep their distance. To your relief, he didn't completely dismiss you. He finally introduced himself as 𝗳𝗏𝗁𝗍𝗁. He made no effort to continue the conversation, but you were fine with that. You were talkative enough for both of you. You complimented his name and asked if you could call him Dshudo, believing that using first names could help foster friendship. He shrugged and said he didn't mind what you called him. You smiled and leaned closer to his desk, noticing his confusion. In his mind, he must have been questioning why you were still there. When he asked you directly, you cheerfully stated that you wanted to be friends with him. You were open about your intentions, though you kept the part about being reincarnated to yourself. You genuinely wanted to be friends. Despite your straightforwardness, Dshudo seemed skeptical. He asked why you wanted to be friends, his tone slightly accusatory. You shrugged and explained that you wanted to be friends with many people and thought he seemed cool. He muttered that he wasn't cool and that he didn't need friends, suggesting you were wasting your time and should talk to someone else. He turned away from you, but you weren't hurt. You understood that his behavior stemmed from his past experiences. You knew that rushing him would only push him further away. Just like with Chisaki, it would take time to break down his walls, but you were confident you could reach him. Chisaki Kai, a man who had cast aside his humanity for his goals, was your brother. Despite his flaws, he loved you dearly. If you could win over Chisaki, you believed you could win over 𝗳𝗏𝗁𝗍𝗁 too. You smiled and told him you would leave for now but would return later, promising not to give up on your quest for friendship. You assured him that you were fun to be around and that he would see it for himself. All things considered, that first interaction had gone well. You expected Dshudo to be antisocial, given what you knew about him, but you didn't take it personally. You felt excited, optimistic, and confident as you walked away to chat with some of the other students, who were discussing their favorite snacks. 𝗓𝗏 tried to ignore you, but he found himself glancing over. Perhaps it was your bubbly personality that drew his attention. It had been a long time since anyone had willingly approached him. His classmates had learned to keep their distance. He overheard you sharing a story about eating an entire tub of ice cream in one sitting, despite the discomfort that followed. The other kids laughed, some impressed by your bravery, while others were in disbelief at your antics. Regardless, you were already making a name for yourself. 𝗓𝗏 scrunched his nose in disapproval. To him, it seemed like a waste of time. He couldn't fathom how their lives could revolve around such trivial matters. To him, cold soba was always the best choice, no contest. Todoroki 𝗓𝗏 didn't think you were particularly wise. When you returned, grinning and asking if you wanted to eat lunch together, he felt he had made his feelings clear. Yet, you persisted and he couldn't understand why. He knew he wasn't funny or interesting and he wasn't sociable either. At only 10 years old, he had a jaded view of life and felt he had no time for friends. His focus was on overcoming his father and becoming stronger, determined to surpass Endeavor using only his right side. He wished he could be carefree and happy like everyone else, but he didn't allow himself to admit it. The anger and self-loathing he carried made living a normal life seem impossible. That's why he thought you were being foolish. He was clearly pushing you away, yet you refused to give up. He told you coldly that he ate alone, hoping his bluntness would make you leave. But you insisted you would be quiet, even pretending to zip your lips shut. 𝗓𝗏 was convinced you must not understand how serious he was. He didn't want friends, nor did he believe he deserved them. As his father's son, he felt it was only natural that he brought misery to those around him. He didn't want to ruin your life as he had with his mother's. He snapped at you, raising his voice slightly, urging you to leave him alone. He cringed at his own words, realizing he might have been too harsh. But he believed it was necessary to make you understand that he was not someone you should follow around. It was for your own good. It was better for everyone if 𝗓𝗏 kept his distance from others. He had convinced himself that he would never bring anyone happiness, that he could never be the person others wanted by their side. He had driven his own mother to the edge of despair. With his father's blood coursing through his veins, he sought to escape the influence of that twisted man, but he would never be truly free. Yet, despite all of that, you still managed to smile at him. If you were certain you wanted him to leave, then you would. But if there was even a chance that you hadn't completely made up your mind, you hoped it was okay for you to stay a little longer. 𝗓𝗏 blinked in surprise. After everything, you still wanted to be around him. Even after he had been rude. Even after he had made it sound like he would never give you the time of day. You noticed the cold soba he had for lunch and exclaimed how much you loved it, sharing your enthusiasm for food in general. You talked about how sometimes you ate more than you should and even mentioned an amusing ice cream story. Your bubbly nature, your talkative and cheerful demeanor, made him wonder if perhaps you were a bit naive. But as he listened to you speak with such passion and joy, as if you truly appreciated every moment of life, he began to realize that you were a genuinely good person. A good person like you wanted to be friends with someone like him, and for some reason, it made his heart race. He thought it was ridiculous. You were only acting this way because you didn't know him well. Once you got to know him better, you would lose interest and keep your distance. The last thing he needed was a distraction. You couldn't possibly understand the weight he carried in his heart. Your life must have been different from his. He doubted you could relate to his pain. Otherwise, how could you be so happy all the time? 𝗓𝗏 shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He needed to tell you to leave, this time for good. But for some reason he couldn't bring himself to do it. Or rather, he didn't want to. It would probably take him a while to admit that to himself. If you wanted to stay, then he probably couldn't change your mind. Whatever. You could do what you wanted, it didn't really affect him either way. If he thought your smile was bright before, now it was almost blinding. You clapped your hands together in excitement, thanking him and promising to be quiet, just as you had said. You wouldn't say anything unless he spoke to you first. He let out a sigh. This wasn't too bad, he supposed. Eating next to someone in class for a change wasn't the end of the world. Just like that, lunch passed, and as promised, you didn't say a single word to him. But your smile never faded, and you kept glancing in his direction, your eyes sparkling. 𝗧𝗏 still wasn't sure what to make of the situation, but he figured you would eventually stop bothering him and move on to someone else. Of course, he was completely wrong about that, but he didn't know it yet. Back to class they went. There were a few lessons left in the day, and 𝗧𝗏 had never struggled with the material. School had always been easy for him. He assumed someone like you might find it challenging. Once again, he was mistaken. The teacher applauded you for solving a problem, praising you as the new gifted student. Even advanced questions seemed easy for you. Gifted student. You were actually smart. 𝗧𝗏's jaw dropped, and right on cue, you looked over at him with a wide grin, proudly stating that it was all in a day's work, flipping your hair for emphasis. He really didn't know what to make of you anymore. But one thing was certain. His life was about to become a lot more eventful. The bell rang, signaling the end of your first day of school. Overall, you felt pretty good. Meeting 𝗧𝗏 had been a pleasant surprise, and you hoped he would eventually open his heart to you. Until then, you would be patient, never discouraged, and continue doing whatever you could to lighten his burden. The other kids practically sprinted out of the classroom, eager to get home. All except for you and 𝗧𝗏. As you slipped on your cute little backpack, you noticed him staring at you with a puzzled expression. Curious, you returned the gaze and asked what was on his mind. You joked about having leftover food on your face from lunchtime. He shook his head, telling you that you were a messy eater and suggesting you pack some napkins next time. You noted that being in a child's body had affected you, as even Chisaki had commented on your lack of table manners. You asked him again what he wanted to say. 𝗧𝗏 tensed up, clearly struggling to find the right words. The way he scrunched his brow in frustration was endearing, so you didn't mind waiting. Eventually, he sighed and confessed that he couldn't stop you from trying to get close to him. But he insisted he wasn't the kind of person you would want as a friend. You could eat lunch with him as many times as you wanted, but that wouldn't change. He thought you should know. You found him adorable, thinking you would give up on him. There was no way you could just sit back and let him suffer alone, especially with the opportunity you had been given. No matter how stubbornly he pushed you away, you would keep coming back. You smiled at him and expressed your feelings, saying that even though you had just met, you wanted to be friends. You didn't care how long it took. Whenever he was ready to call you his friend, you would be there. As you waved goodbye, some kids from the orphanage arrived to pick you up. They greeted you happily and patted you on the head, asking how your first day went. You replied that it was amazing, of course. 𝗧𝗏 didn't say anything else. He just watched as you linked arms with one of the other kids, smiling brightly as you gradually faded into the distance. You were gone now, but the words you had spoken echoed in his mind. You liked him. Surely, you didn't mean it. There was no way you could possibly mean it. Besides, you hardly knew him. The girl felt a strange warmth on her face as she thought about him, even though she knew little about him. She simply expressed her longing to see her friends. The caregiver looked at her curiously and asked where these friends were located. The girl hesitated, trying to describe the place they had visited recently, mentioning a park near a neighborhood where her friends lived. The caregiver then recalled the day the girl had wandered off and gotten separated from her group. The girl confirmed this was indeed the day she was referring to. The caregiver sighed heavily, feeling a mix of exasperation and sympathy for the challenges of looking after her. She explained that the girl was too young to go off on her own and that there were no trips planned for the near future. She inquired if the girl had any way to contact her friends, to which the girl admitted that calling them friends might be an exaggeration since they had only met a couple of times. The caregiver's expression suggested that the girl's admission had not helped her case. It felt like a lost cause. Being only 10 years old and an orphan meant there were many restrictions in place for her safety. Although she considered sneaking out, she knew that would likely lead to trouble. With a sigh, she prepared to give up when suddenly one of her roommates stepped in to help. The girl's roommate offered to accompany her and suggested gathering some of the older kids to ensure everyone would be safe while she visited her friends. The girl felt a surge of hope. Being popular had its perks. The caregiver remained skeptical, voicing concerns about the girl running off without an adult present. The roommate insisted that they were older and responsible enough to take care of the girl, promising to return before curfew and even suggesting they take an emergency phone for communication. Gradually, the caregiver began to soften, and the girl decided to employ her most persuasive tactic, her adorable puppy eyes. She begged to be allowed to go, expressing her eagerness to see her friends, even if they might not be there. The caregiver finally sighed in resignation, agreeing to let her go but warning that if anything went wrong, there would be no second chances. The girl squealed with delight, thanking the caregiver repeatedly before setting off. It was the weekend, and although she wasn't sure if Izuku and Katsuki would be around, she was willing to take the chance. She believed that their previous encounter was no coincidence, just as her presence at the same school as Shudo felt destined. As they approached the right neighborhood, one of the teens asked if they were getting close. The girl nodded, feeling a bit like a celebrity with her group of protectors. However, she quickly focused on the task at hand, knowing the park was just ahead. Her heart raced with excitement, and just as she hoped, she heard familiar voices arguing. She pointed toward the bickering pair, exclaiming that they were her friends. The teens looked at her in disbelief, concerned about the potential chaos. The girl brushed off their worries, insisting that she was there to help them get along. Reluctantly, the teens agreed to watch from a distance as the girl made her entrance, running toward the boys with enthusiasm. She greeted them with a bright smile, expecting their surprise. Katsuki and Izuku paused their argument, staring at her in shock. Katsuki, annoyed, accused Izuku of bringing her back, while Izuku stammered that he hadn't expected her to return. The girl reminded them that she had promised to come back and play. Katsuki, however, was less than thrilled and questioned if she was stalking them, threatening to retaliate if that were the case. The girl found his reaction amusing and playfully replied that it was for him to find out. Katsuki stepped back, visibly disgusted, while he blamed Izuku for attracting such crazy people. The girl felt a mix of excitement and determination, ready to bridge the gap between her friends. It was unclear how Katsuki managed to shift the blame onto Izuku for something that had nothing to do with him, but it was somewhat impressive. Izuku nervously bit his lip, unsure of how to respond. He hesitated, thinking about how to explain that the girl hadn't come for him. Katsuki, however, was quick to interrupt, scowling and balling his hand into a fist. Izuku flinched, instinctively shrinking away. It was no secret that Katsuki bullied Izuku. Their dynamic had been portrayed extensively throughout the series, and witnessing it firsthand was a different experience. It felt disheartening, almost painful to observe. Katsuki's irritation was palpable as he told Izuku to take the girl and leave, expressing his annoyance with a scowl. For a 10-year-old, Katsuki had an impressive amount of pent-up anger. Yet you weren't about to leave. You had come this far and intended to get closer to them, no matter how challenging it might be. You insisted that you weren't a creepy stalker and pointed toward a group of older kids in the distance, claiming they were your friends who adored you. Katsuki's eyes widened in disbelief at your assertion. He questioned how those teenagers could be your friends. You shrugged, casually suggesting that it wasn't hard to have friends as long as they thought you were cool. You were lying, but Katsuki, still a child, seemed gullible enough to believe you. His clenched teeth revealed a hint of jealousy, even if he wouldn't admit it. Katsuki huffed in response, dismissing your claim and questioning why those kids were standing away from you if they liked you so much. You explained that you had asked them for space. He seemed incredulous that they listened to you, but you reiterated your point, enjoying the banter. Katsuki's face reddened as he tried to assert his 𝗵𝗃. He introduced himself with pride, puffing out his chest. You couldn't help but find amusement in his bravado, even as he narrowed his eyes at you and insisted you should leave because girls weren't welcome in their games. You chuckled, teasing him about being afraid of cooties, suggesting that was why he lacked teenage friends. This seemed to ignite something in Katsuki, and he exploded with anger, sparks flying from his hands. You remained unfazed, having dealt with far worse. However, as his fist came dangerously close to your face, you realized he might actually hit you. You instinctively closed your eyes, bracing for impact, but the expected pain never came. When you opened your eyes, you saw Izuku had stepped in front of you, taking the brunt of Katsuki's anger. Izuku was trembling, clutching his arm where Katsuki's punch had landed. Despite only having spoken to him a few times, he had instinctively protected you. It was a testament to his character, embodying the essence of a hero. You recognized that he had a long and difficult journey ahead, but he deserved acknowledgement for his bravery. Izuku winced as he spoke to Katsuki, urging him not to hurt others, no matter the circumstances. Katsuki's frustration boiled over, and he shouted, his emotions flaring as he unleashed more sparks. You frowned at him but chose to kneel beside Izuku, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. You asked if he was all right, expressing gratitude for his bravery. Izuku's cheeks flushed as he downplayed his actions, claiming anyone would have done the same. You knew that wasn't true, many would have stood by and watched. Just then your roommate called out, having heard the commotion. She and the other teens approached, concerned about the noise. You quickly reassured them, hugging Izuku close to hide his discomfort, insisting that everything was fine and that there was nothing to worry about. They were simply having a very intense discussion. Izuku felt mortified by the closeness between them, almost fainting, prompting a quick release as the roommate shrugged and turned back to the group. It seemed they were mostly engrossed in videos on their phones, likely uninterested in intervening unless something more significant occurred. A sharp glare was directed at Katsuki, who was warned that if he didn't want the teenager friends to come over and confront him, he should refrain from his behavior. Katsuki, with a defiant attitude, claimed he wasn't scared and could handle any number of them. His ego was certainly on full display. A warning was reiterated, but Katsuki scoffed, leaving the uncertainty of whether he was genuinely intimidated or just maintaining his tough facade. Concern shifted back to Izuku, who was asked if he was all right, with an apology for the hurt he experienced due to the teasing. Katsuki continued to shake his fist in frustration, but the focus remained on Izuku, who seemed unaccustomed to someone genuinely caring about him. The wide, disbelieving look in his eyes spoke volumes. Izuku stammered that he was all right, his cheeks flushed. He was the cutest thing ever, and the longing to hug him tightly was overwhelming, though it was clear that such affection might be too much for him. He deserved happiness, and it was disheartening to think about why he couldn't just be happy. Katsuki, feeling sidelined, expressed disdain for the concern shown towards Izuku, calling him a loser and suggesting that associating with him would tarnish one's reputation. Such a low blow was disappointing, especially since it seemed that Katsuki hadn't matured much despite hopes for improvement. However, the determination to see their relationship evolve for the better remained strong. The response was that lacking a quirk didn't define someone's worth, it was about how one treated others and the choices they made. Just because Izuku's quirk hadn't manifested yet didn't mean it never would. Izuku's eyes widened with hope, hanging on to every word, even if the future remained uncertain. While Izuku marveled, Katsuki sneered, insisting that all quirks manifested by a certain age and that giving Izuku false hope was unkind. The retort was that some things seemed impossible, but that didn't mean they truly were. Turning back to Izuku, encouragement was offered to keep pursuing his dream of becoming a hero, promising that it would work out for him. It was a truth that felt destined to happen, and Izuku's wide grin reflected the first time someone had believed in him, a bittersweet reminder of his struggles. Izuku's spirits lifted dramatically, showcasing the power of a little kindness and empathy. There was a sense of purpose in wanting to support those in need, perhaps a reason for being reborn into this world. Even if Izuku remained quirkless for a while longer, he wouldn't be alone during the tough moments. A suggestion was made to show Izuku the quirk, which was nothing too special but looked cool nonetheless. Izuku eagerly accepted the offer, eyes shining with excitement. As star fragments materialized, shimmering and gliding between fingers. The beauty of it captivated him, and he expressed his admiration. The demonstration of telekinesis was met with cheers from Izuku, who was thoroughly impressed. Meanwhile, one of Katsuki's friends dismissed the quirk as merely fancy-looking, but Katsuki remained disengaged, feeling a strange irritation watching the joyful interaction between you and Izuku. It was perplexing that, despite being right there, you would rather spend time with Izuku than acknowledge him. Instead of Bakugo Katsuki, the coolest guy in the world, Shudo Todoroki felt uneasy about the situation. He wasn't fond of it at all. He frowned as he gripped his pencil tightly, struggling to comprehend how you, the smartest student in the class, seemed to have it all figured out. It didn't make sense to him, and he hated to admit that he was stuck on the problem. He insisted he was fine, trying to downplay his confusion, claiming he knew how to solve it. You smiled and nodded encouragingly, but your presence made him feel self-conscious. School had never been a challenge for him before, so why was he suddenly struggling, especially in front of you? Stealing a glance, he saw you still watching him with that encouraging smile, ready to help if needed. He scribbled something on his paper and set his pencil down, declaring he had solved it. You frowned, pointing out that all he had done was write his name at the top of the worksheet. He insisted he had the solution memorized and would finish the rest at home, not feeling like working on it at that moment. Deep down, 𝗧𝗏 was a poor liar, and you couldn't help but feel amused by his stubbornness. After all, he was still a kid. The class had been given a free PRD to catch up on homework, and soon the bell rang, signaling the end of the day. You gathered your things and hurried to 𝗧𝗏's side, asking if he was leaving. He nodded, saying he would walk home alone. You weren't surprised, knowing the details of his family life. His mother was in the hospital, and he would prefer not to be picked up by 𝗕𝗏𝗏. His siblings cared for him, but they weren't particularly close due to 𝗕𝗏𝗏's efforts to keep them apart. Every day he walked home alone, which might not seem like a big deal, but his situation was different. You felt compelled to keep him company, even if just for a little while. Glancing out the front door, you noticed the teenagers who usually walked you to the orphanage were not there yet. So, you grabbed 𝗧𝗏's hand, causing his eyes to widen and his heart to race, though you were unaware of the effect you had on him. You exclaimed that it was time to go quickly before your friends arrived to take you away. 𝗧𝗏 found himself swept up in your enthusiasm, your energy infectious. For a brief moment, he forgot about his worries as the two of you ran together, hand in hand, the wind rushing past. He followed you, noticing your brightly decorated backpack filled with stickers, and surprisingly, he didn't mind. It felt nice to let go and escape the burdens he carried. Suddenly, you stopped, realizing you didn't know where he lived. 𝗧𝗏 furrowed his brows, questioning your intelligence. He assured you that you were heading in the right direction and just needed to make a turn ahead. He then asked why you decided to accompany him. You casually explained that you wanted to keep him company since he always walked home alone. Your words were so natural, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. No one had ever wanted to do that before, and yet here you were. A warm, tingly feeling welled up inside 𝗧𝗏's chest, one he wished he could describe. It was a pleasant sensation, one he could easily grow accustomed to. He shrugged, pretending to be indifferent, and told you to do whatever you wanted. You beamed at him, relieved he wasn't trying to push you away. When you reached for his hand again, he recoiled slightly, so you gave him some space. The rest of the walk unfolded as expected, with you carrying the conversation while 𝗧𝗏 responded minimally. Yet, you didn't let his brevity discourage you. You knew he was a good listener. You continued walking until you finally arrived at the 𝗕𝗏𝗏𝗺 household. It was quite large, though it couldn't compare to the 𝗕𝗏𝗁𝗁𝗁 compound. The traditional Japanese-style architecture felt nostalgic, reminding you of your own family, the one you had to leave behind. Caught up in nostalgia, you accidentally blurted out 𝗕𝗏𝗏𝗏's name. 𝗧𝗏 jolted in surprise, asking what you had just said. Realizing your mistake, you scrambled to explain that you meant 𝗕𝗏𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁, 𝗕𝗏𝗏's real name. You noted that 𝗕𝗏𝗁𝗁𝗁 wasn't a common name, and the impressive house looked like where a pro hero would live, leading you to jump to conclusions. You hoped he wouldn't suspect anything. To your relief, 𝗧𝗏 stared at you in silence for a moment before letting out a sigh. He confirmed that 𝗕𝗏𝗏 was indeed his father, looking dejected. Understanding the weight of that revelation, you placed a hand on his shoulder, expressing your sympathy for his situation. 𝗧𝗏 appeared surprised by your kindness. His father was a hero, and many admired him, despite his less-than-ideal personality. He wondered why someone would think it was difficult to live with him. The response came hesitantly, suggesting that his father might not be the best at caring for his family. Realizing he had perhaps shared too much, he quickly apologized, acknowledging that it wasn't really his place to comment. It was fine, 𝗧𝗏 replied, a fleeting, sad smile gracing his lips. He admitted that the observation wasn't entirely wrong and then excused himself, heading into his large, lonely home. Watching him go, a surge of empathy welled up, and he clenched his fists, wishing he could take on even a fraction of 𝗧𝗏's pain. Later, he faced the consequences of his earlier actions. His friends were understandably upset, expressing their concern for his safety after he had run off with Shudo instead of waiting for them. He pleaded with them not to tell anyone, promising he wouldn't repeat his mistake. One of the teens sighed, stating that his charm wouldn't work this time. They reminded him that he could have been hurt and questioned how they could trust him to wait in the future. He explained that he had simply wanted to keep Shudo company, not wanting him to feel lonely. While they acknowledged his good intentions, they emphasized the importance of following the rules for his own safety. They pointed out that even one small accident could lead to serious consequences, and he admitted that he often tuned out the caregiver's warnings. Despite their valid concerns, they ultimately decided not to report him, but warned him to be more careful in the future. He was still young and vulnerable, a fact he couldn't deny. It was part of the reason he had left the 𝗕𝗁𝗁𝗍𝗂𝗂. He lacked the strength to protect himself. He knew he needed to grow stronger, but for now he was still a bit of a weakling, albeit an adorable one. Everyone agreed to keep his little adventure a secret, and as long as he didn't do it again, they would take it to their graves. It felt good to be liked, allowing him some leeway. He returned to the orphanage without incident, ready to relax with a juice box. However, one of the caregivers approached him, causing a wave of anxiety to wash over him. He feared someone had betrayed him, but then the caregiver announced he had a visitor. For a moment, he worried it might be Chisaki, even though he had promised to stay away. He felt safe in the orphanage, knowing he wouldn't be harmed in front of others. Yet, as he was led to the waiting room, he couldn't shake the feeling of apprehension. To his surprise, the visitor was not Chisaki but a little boy with curly hair and freckled cheeks. The moment their eyes met, a smile broke across his face. Izuku had come to see him, excited to play together. He rushed over, unable to contain his joy, and hugged Izuku tightly, causing the boy's face to turn a bright shade of red. Izuku explained that he had come to visit because he knew he couldn't always come out to play, and he hoped it was all right. Of course, he beamed, thrilled that Izuku had made the effort. Izuku's mother, Inko, smiled warmly at them, expressing her gratitude for their friendship. She seemed touched by his words, perhaps realizing that Izuku didn't have many friends. He vowed to be the friend Izuku deserved, just like All Might always said, he was there for him now. He took Izuku's hand, and though the boy blushed, he didn't pull away. They decided to play together, excited to build puzzles and enjoy their time. The caregiver must have been charmed by Izuku's cuteness, allowing him to visit without the usual restrictions. She couldn't possibly turn away the goodest boy, and you felt endlessly grateful for it. The caregiver reminded you that he couldn't stay for long and that they would be watching everything, so no funny business was allowed. You leaned closer to whisper into Izuku's ear, explaining that the caregiver was saying that because you often found yourself in trouble, but that came with the popularity, and you couldn't really help it. He stared at you for a few seconds before bursting into a fit of giggles. You adored him. Pops held an envelope in his hands, and the longer he stared at it, the bigger his smile grew. He called out for Chisaki, announcing that your first letter had arrived. When there was no response, Pops shook his head and sighed, knowing that the stubborn boy would be the death of him someday. He understood why Chisaki was upset after being separated from his beloved little sister, but it was time for him to regain his composure. He couldn't keep brooding forever. Still, Pops waited, confident that Chisaki would make an appearance soon. A few moments later, Pop's prediction came true. Chisaki scowled, expressing that he didn't care about you anymore and that you might as well be dead to him. He insisted that he wanted nothing to do with a coward who abandoned her own family. Pops warned him not to speak about his sister that way, but Chisaki was resolute. He walked off without another word, and Pops shook his head in disappointment. He knew just how deep Chisaki's feelings for you ran, evidenced by the meltdown he had on the day you left. Unfortunately, Chisaki was as stubborn as they came and likely wouldn't be swayed anytime soon. So, Pops took a seat, tore open the envelope, and read through your letter, smiling all the while. Once he finished, he placed the letter on the table in plain sight and walked out of the room, leaving the door open. As intended, Chisaki crept into the room shortly after. He hesitated for a moment, staring down at the letter. What was he doing? He had sworn to himself that he would never forgive you. From the moment you chose to leave, you had essentially cut ties with him. You had told him that he meant nothing to you, that he could be cast aside without a second thought. He had spent so much of his life protecting you, ensuring that the harsh world didn't tarnish you, and yet this was how you repaid him. Chisaki was angry, immeasurably so ever since you left. But there were other emotions he felt too, not just anger. Sadness, regret, and above all else, longing. He longed to see you again, to hold you in his arms and hear your cute little giggle. He wanted to see your pretty smile, a smile he secretly wished you would reserve exclusively for him and Pops. Chisaki could try to deny it all he wanted, but he would always love you. So, he did exactly what Pops had known he would do from the very start. He read your letter. The emotions he felt from that point onward were incredibly conflicting. On one hand, he was happy just to know that you were safe and healthy. He brushed a gloved finger over the paper's surface, tracing the outline of every word you had written. It was your handwriting, and that simple fact alone made his heartbeat quicken. Unfortunately, the letter wasn't very detailed, and he suspected that part was intentional on your end. You were trying to keep him and Pops at arm's length. That was the whole reason you left in the first place. You talked about how nice everyone at the orphanage was and mentioned that you had recently started school. Apparently, you were rather fond of your uniform, and Chisaki chuckled at the thought of you twirling in front of him to show it off. Those were the positive emotions he felt while reading your letter. But on the other hand, it made him angrier than before. At no point did you convey that you regretted leaving or that you wished he could be there to protect you. You made it sound as if you were doing just fine without him, and that hurt deeply. Chisaki finished the letter and stood there in silence. He had been a mess ever since you walked out of his life. Even though he put on a brave face and tried not to let it show, every day crushed him. The only comfort he found was that when he fell asleep, you were there with him in his dreams. But no dream was permanent, and when he woke up, he hated the world all over again. Perhaps that was what all those years spent with you were, a long, impossibly happy dream. He chuckled humorlessly at the thought, never imagining he could be so emotional. Despite the mixed feelings, Chisaki tucked the letter into his pocket, determined to read it over and over again. It was one of the few things he had left of you, and he would be dead if he ever let it out of his sight. As he walked out of the room, he immediately halted. Pops was reclined against a wall, a cunning smile spread across his lips. He teased Chisaki about not reading the letter, to which Chisaki scowled and insisted he hadn't. Pops pressed further, asking where it was, and Chisaki gritted his teeth, storming off while hearing Pops laugh behind him. To Chisaki, you and Pops were the two people he held most dear, but right now, he couldn't stand being ridiculed by that old man. He shut himself in his room and tucked the letter away for safekeeping, planning to read it every night before bed, hoping it would make his dreams sweeter. Still, he wondered how much longer he could go on, subsisting solely on letters and memories. He needed you back in his life and refused to believe you were gone for good. Izuku marveled at your puzzle-solving skills, amazed at how quickly you connected pieces and assembled more of the picture. You had chosen an animal-themed puzzle, and gradually, a corgi's adorable face was taking shape. You declared your own brilliance, confident in your abilities, claiming that you had always been good at solving puzzles because you were so smart. Izuku admired your confidence, wishing he could be more like you. He lowered his head, feeling shame. It was clear that his self-esteem was practically non-existent, thanks to those who had put him through hell. It would likely take some time for him to start believing in himself more. The upcoming meeting with All Might was expected to be a significant turning point in his growth, but there was hope that, until then, he could be helped to gain a bit more confidence. The encouragement was unwavering, emphasizing that there was no reason for him not to feel self-assured. He was genuinely nice, enjoyable to be around, and undeniably adorable. The reaction was immediate and intense. His eyes widened in surprise, and a sharp intake of breath suggested he was on the verge of losing his composure. The compliment lingered in the air, and as one cheek was playfully poked, it was clear that the intent was innocent, akin to how one might describe the cuteness of a pet. However, he interpreted it differently, considering their similar ages. He stumbled over his words, astonished that someone had called him cute. His face turned a deep shade of red, and he pressed his palms against his cheeks, trying to contain his excitement. It was almost too much to handle, and the effect of the words was evident as he sat there, awestruck and flustered, lost in thought. It was a delightful sight, witnessing the impact of such simple words on him. Eventually, a sense of accomplishment filled the air as another puzzle was completed in record time. The excitement was palpable, and he shyly offered encouragement, even raising his tiny fist in celebration, which was enough to melt hearts. Just as another comment was about to escape, a caregiver approached, reminding that it was time for him to go home. The rules about visitations were strict, and while it was disappointing to part ways, there was gratitude for the time spent together. The thought of being trapped in a less favorable situation made the current moment feel even more precious. Gratitude was expressed for the time spent, and he nodded enthusiastically, confirming how much fun he had. The blush returned as he acknowledged the joy of being with a friend. Farewells were exchanged, and he continued to wave even after stepping out of the building, leaving a smile behind. As he walked away, his spirits were high, almost as if he were on a sugar rush. The joy he felt was evident, and it didn't go unnoticed by his mother or a certain blonde classmate who watched with a mix of curiosity and irritation. The sight of Izuku's happiness sparked a sense of annoyance, and he couldn't quite understand why. Thoughts raced through Katsuki's mind as he observed Izuku humming happily while walking hand in hand with his mother. They had just returned from an outing, and the source of Izuku's joy was a mystery that piqued his interest. The mention of a friend brought a wider smile to Izuku's face, which only deepened Katsuki's frown. He felt an inexplicable irritation at the thought of Izuku spending time with someone he deemed annoying. It shouldn't bother him, but it did. He tried to convince himself that it was good riddance, that he didn't want to see that girl again. Yet, deep down it lingered. In another moment, a drawing was presented to Shudo, a poorly executed picture that barely resembled him. Despite the roughness of the art, the gesture was genuine, and it was clear that the intention was to bring a smile. Shudo felt a slight blush creep onto his face, flattered by the compliment, even if the drawing itself left much to be desired. The response was kind, and he found himself wanting to spare her feelings. He didn't want her smile to fade, as it brought him a sense of warmth. The enthusiasm was infectious, and he listened as she excitedly planned future drawings, imagining epic adventures together. As the school day came to a close, Shudo found himself lingering, standing beside her without a clear reason to leave. Curiosity sparked, and she questioned his intentions. He simply stated that he would wait, leaving the air filled with unspoken possibilities. "Is someone coming to pick you up today?" It couldn't possibly be his mother, and it was unlikely to be Endeavor either. Maybe it was his sister, Fuyumi. Or even Natsuo. He mentioned that he would wait until she left. His lips pursed slightly as he continued, indicating that he was serious. He recalled hearing that she had gotten in trouble for walking home with him instead of waiting for the group that took her to the orphanage. From that moment on, he decided he would wait until they arrived before leaving, wanting to ensure she wouldn't face any trouble again. She blinked in surprise. Was he worried about her? She never intended for it to seem like such a big deal, especially since the other kids had covered for her, and she hadn't actually faced any reprimand from the caregivers. She chuckled, assuring him that she wouldn't make the same mistake twice. She had learned her lesson and wanted to walk home with him that day, but from now on, she promised not to break the rules. There was no need for him to worry, she wasn't that much of a troublemaker. He insisted on waiting, and it was clear from the way he firmly planted his feet that he wasn't going anywhere. She found his stubbornness endearing. She enjoyed their conversations and appreciated the time they spent together. However, she didn't realize that he was only partially telling the truth. Yes, he wanted to ensure she wouldn't get in trouble again, but he also wanted to extend the time they spent together, even if it was just a little longer. She decided to change the subject, asking him about his personal best for how many marshmallows he could fit in his mouth. She claimed hers was 20. Her quirky questions always brought a smile to his face, even if he tried to hide it. Regrettably, it didn't take long for her friends to arrive. She pretended to sob as she said goodbye to him, emphasizing how much she would miss him, even though they would see each other in class the next morning. He humored her, and once he confirmed she was safe with her group, he began his journey home. The walk felt lonelier than usual. Ever since that day they had walked home together, he realized how much better it was to have someone by his side. But it had to be her. There was something about her that made him feel at ease, a feeling he found hard to explain. Upon arriving home, he was met with silence, as always. Natsuo and Fuyumi were likely still at school, but even if they were home, he wasn't allowed to interact with them much. His father kept him on a tight leash, isolating him from the rest of the family. He felt a surge of frustration as he trudged to his room. He only found a few moments of peace at home. As soon as his father returned, he would be forced to train for the rest of the day. This routine had been the same ever since his quirk developed, and no matter how much time passed, he would never grow accustomed to it. The only thing he could do was focus on becoming stronger, and one day, he would surpass his father on his own terms, relying solely on his mother's side. As he unpacked his school bag, still scowling, he recalled how good he felt just a short while ago when he was with her. But being inside this house had a way of darkening his thoughts. Years of oppression and isolation had conditioned him to feel unsafe, even in his own home. He set his notebooks aside and pulled out his lunchbox, but as he reached the bottom of the bag, he paused. It was the drawing she had given him, the one that hardly resembled him at all. Now that he took a moment to look it over again, he realized she really couldn't draw to save her life. It was almost impressive in its own way. He held the drawing carefully, not wanting to wrinkle the paper. Had given this to him, and despite its lack of quality, it was the thought that mattered. That thought alone brought him happiness. He searched through his room until he found some tape and, without a second thought, stuck the drawing onto one of the walls. It was now proudly displayed, allowing him to look at it whenever he wanted. A smile spread across his lips, and in that moment he felt a little more like the version of himself she had drawn. At school, she felt a surge of confidence that sometimes even scared her a bit. It was a day like any other. She attended school, enjoyed her usual antics with 𝗧𝗏, and then her friends came to pick her up. She hadn't expected anything particularly interesting to happen on the way back to the orphanage, so she began a lengthy discussion about why it was acceptable to eat dessert before dinner. Suddenly, she sensed someone following her. Bringing her thoughts back to the present, she noticed Katsuki. She frowned, acknowledging that she could see him. He jolted in surprise, clearly caught off guard while trying to hide behind a telephone pole. He stammered, surprised to see her. It seemed like bad luck for him to run into her. She crossed her arms, feeling rather smug now that the tables had turned. Well, who's the stalker now? He protested vehemently, denying any intention of stalking her, but it was clear to anyone watching that he had been following her. One of her friends asked who he was, wondering if he had come all that way just to say hi. She sighed, commenting on how he was just bad at being honest, feeling a bit embarrassed for him. Katsuki's face turned bright red, and she knew that his hot-headed nature made it easy to fluster him, especially since she knew exactly how to push his buttons. Another friend chimed in, teasingly suggesting that he might have a crush on her. Katsuki's jaw dropped in disbelief as he found himself in an embarrassing situation, surrounded by a group of teenage girls who were teasing him. He stammered in frustration, trying to assert himself, but his voice faltered, diminishing his intimidating presence. One girl remarked on his rudeness, suggesting that he was a bad influence and that it was clear he had feelings for someone in their group. The mention of being a boyfriend sent a jolt of panic through Katsuki, leaving him flustered. Despite the teasing, there was a hint of sympathy for him, though the fun of the moment was hard to resist. One of the girls decided to ease off a bit, casually mentioning how nice it was to meet him, even if it was by chance. She invited him to visit her at the orphanage she was staying at if he ever found himself nearby again. Katsuki, clearly annoyed, dismissed the idea with a series of insults, calling her annoying and ugly. She gasped in response, defending her looks and challenging his remarks. The banter escalated into a playful exchange of insults, filled with more teasing than either had anticipated. Their verbal sparring continued until other orphans intervened, pulling them apart while they both shouted playful obscenities at each other. As Katsuki stormed away, he mentally noted that he would have to come up with more insults for their next encounter. Unbeknownst to him, he wasn't the only one who had followed her that day. Another figure, Kurono, cleared his throat, prompting Chisaki to consider their next move. Chisaki had not seen her in weeks and had hoped for a chance to speak with her, but the interruption had ruined his opportunity. Determined to find her again, Chisaki had tracked her to the orphanage and planned to learn her routine. He reassured himself that this was just a phase she was going through, and after a proper conversation, she would realize her mistake and want to return home. As he turned to leave, he cast a glance back at Katsuki, who seemed familiar. The memory of the boy she had given a figurine to years ago resurfaced, adding to Chisaki's irritation. He contemplated whether to confront the boy for his disrespectful comments, but Kurono advised against it, suggesting that it would only lead to trouble. Chisaki reluctantly decided to let it go for now, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the boy was a nuisance. He muttered to himself about how adorable his little sister was, convinced that anyone who disagreed simply lacked good judgment. Kurono remained silent, knowing that any comment he made could provoke Chisaki further.